Chapter 700. Wu Zuanliang sat in the wide mobile surveillance vehicle. Screens and projections from 3 directions were playing images, tables and data information at every moment, painting him with a colorful luster. This mobile surveillance vehicle was originally used to monitor and analyze the real-time images in the wilderness, but now that the field collection work had come to an end, it was used to do graphical processing. At the very least, it was necessary to package the results of more than half a year of hard work in order to convince the investors who were best at thinking with their eyes and testicles. This was the evaluation and method that the early investors used for their own kind. This kind of packaging work was naturally handled by professionals. The experimental dogs under Wu Zuanliang completely retreated to the position of odd job workers and played second fiddle. In front of the 3 projection screens, 7 or 8 men and women of different ages were scattering and piecing together the various results of the research team over the past half a year. The originally rigorous logic gave way to a more intuitive and impactful visual effect to serve the almost absurd dreamlike conjectures. Wu Zuanliang began to pinch his eyebrows. On one hand, it was annoying to watch, and on the other hand, he was also an old man in his 90s. Even at the end of the 21st century, where the average lifespan exceeded 100 years, he was no longer at an age where he was full of energy. Returning from the wilderness laboratory hundreds of kilometers away from the city, the convoy had already been bumpy on the rugged mountain road for 6 or 7 hours, almost making his stomach jump out of his stomach. Ding Zhiying, who was 5 years younger than him, had already fallen asleep with his head tilted up, saliva dripping down his neck. Wu Zuanliang did not laugh at him. In any case, if it were him, he would not be much better. In fact, the 2 old men could go to the car in the back and sleep, but unfortunately, they could not reach the state of out of sight, out of mind, so they could only waste time here. What was he thinking before? The dense fragrance of tea entered his nose, and a female student in a hunting suit brought a cup of tea. The cup was large enough to drink like a bull, and it was warm in his hand. A sip could warm his stomach, but unfortunately, his heart and lungs did not change much. After Wu Zuanliang drank 2 mouthfuls of hot tea, he remembered to speak, Tang Yi. Teacher. About that explanation, that topic. A very interesting idea. Wu Zuanliang blinked his sore eyes, and then narrowed his eyes at the disciple he was most proud of in recent years. 2 seconds later he grinned and said, it is just an idea. No, it is extremely provocative both to people and to money. While the teacher and the student were talking, the experimental dogs in the mobile surveillance vehicle were working hard on their chores while they pricked up their ears. Tang Yi's words could be the source of their salary for the next year and a half. It could also be the start of a new round of overtime. It was a matter of life and death. They had no choice but to pay attention to it. But at that moment, the bumpy car slowed down and came to a stop. Soon, the door of the carriage opened, and Senior Colonel Meng Tu, who was in charge of the team's safety, stepped forward and informed them. There's a change in the flight schedule, so we won't be able to leave tonight. We'll rest in Spring City for the night, and we'll decide if the situation changes tomorrow. We shouldn't have left in the first place. Wu Zuanliang slapped his knee and spat. It's all because of the money. Old Ding Zhiying, who was behind them, finally woke up and asked in confusion. What's wrong? We've arrived? Senior Colonel Meng Tu repeated his words again, and Ding Zhiying chuckled. Out of habit, she retorted. You're already here and you're still saying such things. Your old pan might have already prepared breakfast for tomorrow. It'll be a waste. Don't worry, there's no need to think about breakfast. She's prepared a belly full of sarcastic words. Wu Zuanliang chuckled and stood up while the car stopped. He loosened his muscles and temporarily forgot about that damned lecture topic. He asked, Did she say what's going on? Why are there abnormal movements from the mutants, affecting the takeoff and landing of the flight? Meng Tu shook his head. From the looks of it, it has nothing to do with the mutants. I heard that a case has occurred in the city, and they're currently investigating and searching for the culprits. Both air and land transportation have been restricted. A murder case. It seems to be a robbery, but I'm not too sure about the specifics. However, there's an arrest scene in front of us. The motorcade will have to wait for a while before passing through. Didn't they catch them? They're suspected to be accomplices. Ding Jiying curled her lips. In this world, there's no place to rob a bank. How big of a case can they commit? The corner of Meng Tu's mouth twitched. Seeing that his half-year sentence was about to end, he couldn't be bothered to lower himself to the level of these two old men. These two old men were nearly 200 years old together. They had pretty much experienced everything, yet they were extremely calm and collected. Ding Jiying laughed. At least we didn't get the news when we arrived at the airport. We can spend the night in the hotel and concentrate on organizing the information. Wu Zuanliang snorted. What's the fuss about when we're about to leave? Who was the fuss just now? Ding Jiying didn't even deign to scold him. She just said, if everything was done properly, why would we need to worry about it? The current situation is that the lecture topic is very frightening. It forcefully relies on some new plane. But where's the argument? Whether it's Xia City or Spring City, they're all using a bunch of so-called first-hand information to blackmail people. Who are they trying to fool to get those people to throw money at them? Wu Zuanliang shot a glance at Meng Tuesday. His gaze pointed towards the female disciple he was proud of. His meaning was, oh, it's your turn to continue the previous topic. Tang Yi was pushed to the front by her teacher, but she was still calm. The latest data is pretty good. We're doing comparative research. The topic comes from the comparison. Hee little Tang, you graduate students can handle the updating of data. Is there a need for us two old men to come over? You're right about one thing. The topic comes from the comparison. But where are the new topics that can be continued after the comparison? Suspected planar pollution source interference comparative research. This topic is quite resounding. The big and small bosses were scolding each other. The experimental dogs in the car shrunk their necks and acted as if they didn't understand what the humans were saying. They weren't in the mood to work. There was a young man operating in front of the screen. He was more curious about the outside world than the internal squabbles. He secretly took a look at the external camera of the mobile surveillance car. He wanted to watch the show. But he made a mistake. He forgot to split the screen and shrink it. Now everyone in the car could see it. The front of the motorcade was indeed a mess. A group of people were confronting the military and police. There were also physical conflicts. The scene was explosive. Coupled with the black muzzles that had been raised, it didn't look like an arrest. It looked more like a prelude to an armed conflict. Someone cried out. The young man hurriedly tried to cut it, but he heard two people say at the same time. Wait. It was Wu Zuanliang and Meng Tu who spoke. In the past 6 months, there weren't many times when they had the same opinion. Wu Zuanliang stared at the screen without blinking. That car is stuffed with chrysanthemum bugs? Meng Tu didn't speak again, but his eyes also pointed at the small motorcade of 3 SUVs in front of them, especially the car filled with indescribable meaty threads. Relatively speaking, Wu Zuanliang's thoughts were simpler. We didn't collect any specimens of chrysanthemum bugs this time, right? Ask them if they were hunted in the volcanic area or outside the area. It would be great if there were fire god ants parasitizing them. Meng Tu frowned and looked at it for a long time. Then he personally operated it. He enlarged the external camera and locked on to the details of the chrysanthemum bugs, especially the seemingly distorted burn wounds. Wait a minute, I'll go down. Ask them where they are. Wu Zuanliang reminded him. Meng Tu didn't respond and got out of the car. Looking at the image of the external camera, he went straight to the scene of the conflict. The young experimental dogs all stared at him with some kind of malicious expectation. However, the change in the situation was still beyond most people's expectations. After Meng Tu went over and revealed his identity, both sides showed respect or fear, and then they compromised. Of course, there was a relatively long communication in the middle, but the emotions and attitudes on the faces of everyone on the opposite side were still very clear under the high-precision camera. Senior Colonel Meng really has face. An experimental dog who accidentally regarded Meng Tu as a security captain for a long time finally realized what kind of status a senior colonel of the Special Warfare Forces had. Not mentioning how nervous the experimental dogs were, Meng Tu quickly came back. When he got in the car, Wu Zuanliang asked, "Are they selling it? Let's go back to the city with them. There's something we can confront and confirm." Meng Tu was worried that the two old men would cause trouble again, so he explained. It's the X2 robot we encountered when we just moved to Spring City last year. It's the one that affected the sampling in the volcanic area and destroyed our first wave of mimicry reconnaissance planes. Didn't it enter the core of the volcanic area? Afterwards, there were no results. Oh! The two old men acted as if they had suddenly realized something. Ding Jiying was very surprised. It's been almost half a year and it's so far away. How do you know it's related to that robot? Because of the wound. At this time, the conflict ahead had temporarily calmed down and was preparing to move again. Meng Tu didn't mind chatting with the two old men for a while. He was also in a good mood after unexpectedly discovering an important clue. The X2 robot from last time embodies a kind of special technique. It's not convenient to talk about the specifics, but it's the kind that we Deep Blue Walkers pay a lot of attention to. It's a pity that we didn't have any new clues until this chrysanthemum demon bug corpse. The wound on it is very similar to the situation that appeared half a year ago. The format of fire, the extraordinary power enchantment, had always been the focus of the military's research. Naturally, they had to pay 120% attention to situations that appeared outside of the system. Meng Tu thought for a moment and said, Professor Wu, Professor Ding, I want to get a brief report on the cause of the chrysanthemum demon bug's death as soon as possible. I hope to borrow the research team's equipment. No problem, it's fine if you lend it to me. Wu Zuanliang had a face full of generosity as he knocked his own chest. In any case, I can't leave at night. It's just the right time to do something. Senior Colonel Meng, go and inform the sampling. Hey little Zhao, go and help. The experimental dog got up with a tragic and stirring heart, shook his head and wagged his tail as he followed Meng Tuesday. Chapter 701. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the Mercy Hospital robbery briefing was held at the Spring City Military and Police Joint Defense Center. Meng Tu was able to participate in the meeting as the provider of important clues, a high-ranking officer of the Field Army Special Forces, and a part of his identity as a guest. He had basically completed most of his objectives at this point. Just as he was wondering if he should communicate with his superior, Tian Bang, someone greeted him from the staff area. He turned around and saw a familiar face. Major Chun, no, Lieutenant Colonel Chun, congratulations. Lieutenant Colonel Chun took the initiative to greet him. He was the person in charge of the supply base when the scientific research team first arrived in Spring City. Half a year ago he was still a major. Now his rank had risen by 1 rank, and he was not even 50 years old. Even in the city defense system, it was still something worth celebrating. Lieutenant Colonel Chun had a good personality and a good temper. He was a very smooth person and knew how to expand the topic. He knew that he could greet Meng Tu, but there was nothing to talk about. Thus, he decisively introduced another person. Senior Colonel Meng, this is the hero of our Spring City Army, Captain Cho Wei. Meng Tu was wondering who this person was wearing sunglasses in the conference room. He immediately came to a realization when he heard this. He immediately stood up, saluted, and extended his hand. The other party's movements were almost synchronized. Then they shook hands. Captain Cho, no, I should call him Junior Cho. I'm a student in the 3rd phase of the burning stage, 1 batch ahead of you. I remember that you were with our Major General Tian and Major He Yuan. The other party took the opportunity to call him Senior Meng. His voice was hoarse, and he still did not take off his sunglasses. Meng Tu did not find it strange. This Captain Cho in front of him was the commander of the Deep Blue Walker team, who was protecting the vagrant tribe during their 1,000-mile return journey last year. Unfortunately, he encountered a mutation infection, but he suppressed it with his strong willpower until the mission was completed. Although Meng Tu was in the wilderness laboratory at that time, he had heard of his name for a long time. I've seen your frontline footage. You faced a poisonous mantis, and your exoskeleton was damaged. You didn't even take half a step back. You traded injuries for lives. Most importantly, you completed it in 4 seconds. Even I can't do better than you. Cho Wei was not good with words and was a man of few words. He only said, "Thank you, Senior." No qualified commander would want to let go of such an excellent person, and Meng Tu was the same. You've recovered from your injuries, right? It would be a pity to stay in the Coastal Defense Force. How about it? Are you interested in joining the Coastal Defense Force? Cho Wei just smiled. I'm still under observation. Although Cho Wei was wearing sunglasses, for a burner like Meng Tu, it wasn't completely effective. He understood what Cho Wei meant and comforted him. Being able to participate in this kind of occasion is in itself a very good development. Cho Wei said objectively. It's mainly related to the Research and Treatment Center. Oh, according to the information, the woman who performed the surgery has been working in the Research and Treatment Center for a long time. This happened when I came out for surgery today. The timing is very good. Lieutenant Colonel Chen really didn't want to discuss this topic, so he forcefully changed the topic. Senior Colonel Meng, it's rare for you to come back to Spring City. Let me and Captain Cho play host for the next 2 days. You can also come to my place and train those newbies. Meng Tu chuckled. I can't stay for long because I have a mission. I'll be escorting the research team out tomorrow, so I can only decline Lieutenant Colonel Chen's good intentions. Lieutenant Colonel Chen blinked. Senior Colonel Meng has been here for half a year just for that research team? What kind of research is that? Oh, I misspoke. It's nothing. It's public anyway. It's just that I'm not a professional, so it's a bit hard to say. From what I've heard, they're mainly engaged in comparative research of the aberrated ecosphere. Their main focus is on the similarities and differences of the wilderness ecology between Spring City and Xia City. Lieutenant Colonel Chen had been grinding in the wilderness for many years, so he had some understanding. Oh, I've heard of it. Right now, it's said that the ecosphere of Spring City and Xia City is rapidly converging. Yes, especially in the volcanic region southwest of Spring City. The ecosphere ruled by the Vulcan ants is like a kaleidoscope of aberrations. Whether it's the horizontal population size or the vertical evolution of aberrations, the rate of change is extremely high. Similar phenomena have appeared in the vicinity of Xia City. And recently, there's been frequent crustal movements on both sides. It's as if there's some kind of linkage. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's curiosity was piqued. Then, are there any conclusions from the research? Meng Tu was about to shake his head when he thought of the topic of the lecture not too long ago. He couldn't help but chuckle. Yes, there's a hole in my brain right now. I suspect that it's because of the migration of a new plane. A new plane? Yes, there's a plane similar to the Deep Blue World. It's like a wheel that's rolling over the space and time we're in. The back end is in Spring City, and the front end is in Xia City. The briefing officially began as he spoke. This was a standard short meeting. The information had already been distributed in advance, listing nearly all the important clues. It included a large number of images and surveillance system records. The professionals already had a preliminary understanding of the situation. By relying on this information, the non-professional leaders didn't need to explain in detail. They just needed to know the general outline, and then make arrangements and clear the responsibilities. Because of this, the professionals only roughly combed through the sequence of events. Most of the information was hastily skimmed over. But some of the analysis was a bit more interesting. It can be determined that the suspect went all the way from the southwest direction of the wilderness outside the city to Spring City. He encountered the hunting squad of former City Defense Force Lieutenant Bao Hongliang at Huilong Ridge, 273 kilometers outside the city, and killed a chrysanthemum bug. According to Bao Hongliang's testimony, the suspect was wearing an exoskeleton armor at the time. It's suspected to be a modified version of the X-2 robot. And according to the clues provided by Senior Colonel Meng Tu of the East Asian Coast Defense Force's 1st Special Forces Brigade, an X-2 robot charged into the heart of the southwestern volcanic region at the end of last year. And the mode of use of its energy weapon is very similar to the one displayed on the chrysanthemum bug that was killed this time. The two are highly related. This proves that the suspect has been operating in and around Spring City for a very long time. At the same time, we also have to pay attention to the basic structural requirements of the exoskeleton armor. Even if the suspect's armor was privately modified, it would be very difficult for it to have a particularly extreme design. Based on conventional structural inference, after the suspect wore the exoskeleton, His figure would be similar to Bao Hongliang's, so his real figure would be a bit smaller. His height is estimated to be between 167 and 172 centimeters, and his weight wouldn't exceed 65 kilograms. He could be a thin man, or he could be a woman. There would be obvious conflicts with the current image data. The suspect should have an accomplice with extremely high hacking skills. He should be able to erase most of the traces left in the surveillance system, and he could hack into the shuttle's control system to easily cut off the power. From the time frame of the operation, his goal is very clear. He is also very clear about the problems he will face in the process of robbing, and he has a clear solution. As he listened, Meng Tu couldn't help but laugh. You guys are holding this meeting with bad intentions. Lieutenant Colonel Chen smiled and didn't say anything. Cho Wei, however, said in a hoarse voice, Quantum Corporation can't get out of this no matter what. Lieutenant Colonel Chen grimaced when he heard these words. They really did hit the nail on the head. Practically at the same time the two burners made their comments, the direction of the meeting took a clear turn. It was just as the political official presiding over the meeting said. The robber's goal is very clear. He's going after Quantum Corporation. In other words, he robbed Quantum Corporation's goal. However, we really want to know what Quantum Corporation's goal is. The person in charge of Quantum Corporation in Spring City was a typical elite. He wore a well-ironed suit and sat in his seat without saying a word. The person in charge of the police force sat beside him. He was like a sniffer dog that had found a suspicious target, constantly sniffing around. Madame Ren Qi is a high-ranking medical staff of the Mutant Research and Treatment Center. Today is the only time she's taken sick leave in the past 6 months to return to Spring City for surgery. How did your esteemed company know of this beforehand and arrange for a shuttle to send 2 B-class powerhouses to take over the uterine fibroids she had removed? Someone coldly said. What an extraordinary interest. Low laughter could be heard in the conference room. The person in charge of Spring City of Quantum Corporation still had the face of an elite, but his face had unconsciously darkened. Then came the complaint of the director of the Mutant Research and Treatment Center. We've already asked Ren Qi. She has no dealings with Quantum Corporation. She doesn't have any dealings with the people that appeared inside and outside of her surgery room. She has no impression whatsoever. I must say, this is an extremely sensitive and impolite behavior. Following that, the questions from all over Spring City couldn't stop. What's the nature of that uterine fibroid? Does your esteemed company already have a new path in the field of mutant research? We need more detailed background information. Meng Tu and the other two hadn't said a word since the start of the meeting. However, just by listening to these people's crazy bombardment, they already felt that it was very lively. At this time, even the cautious Lieutenant Colonel Chen let go. He sighed. That suspect is definitely trying to attract attention from all sides. Otherwise, there's no reason for there to be no video data on the route into the city, but it's all over Compassion Hospital. He's really going all out against the subsidiary companies. As an elite of the military's Team AB, Meng Tu expressed his delight at this scene. Quantum Corporation making a fool of themselves and exposing their actions is probably the person's biggest goal other than the uterine fibroids. Evidently, he's succeeded. Speaking up to this point, Meng Tu was also somewhat surprised. Spring City has quite a lot of opinions about Quantum Corporation. It's very rare to see such a situation where everyone is attacking them. After all, Quantum Corporation and the capital power behind it had enormous influence all over the world. No matter how much they tossed and turned, they would still have to give them some face. It wasn't like now, where they were practically spitting in the face and treating the person in charge as a suspect. The corner of Lieutenant Colonel Chen's mouth twitched. It's Quantum Corporation's fault for overreacting. Now up there. He extended his hand and pointed upwards. I heard that Quantum Corporation directly deployed a private airship from outer space. It entered the atmosphere in half an hour, and is now circling the airspace around Spring City. The mayor and our boss are all green in the face. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's boss was naturally the commander of Spring City's border defense forces. Quantum Corporation's actions were equivalent to offending both the military and political bigwigs of Spring City's local system. It was no wonder that everyone was attacking them. Meng Tu was truly shocked. That uterine fibroid. Could it be a sacred fetus? Before he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a slight difference in the light beside him. He subconsciously turned his head and looked through the window of the conference room. He saw that a part of Spring City's dazzling night scene had been suddenly hollowed out. Chapter 702. Under the dim light, Luonan gazed at the dark red flesh beneath the white gauze. Aside from his line of sight, there were also penetrating interference waves. He connected the external neuron to the virtual brain system's analytical capabilities to perform a comprehensive examination and analysis of the target he had obtained in the afternoon. For those who were completely ignorant, this was just a uterine fibroid that had just been removed from a patient's body. For Quantum Corporation and chiefly way behind the scenes, this was a collection and storage system that had already collected a large amount of special components of mutants. For Luonan, who controlled the external neuron and the virtual brain system, it was a technological crystallization from an unknown civilization. Its official name was the Night-Level Basic Implanted Biochemical Furnace. Behind it was an enormous system as vast as the seas. This was knowledge that could be researched for a lifetime. But before he could research it, he needed to cut off the little tail left behind by Li Wei. The conditional format lock and the possible remote positioning settings had to be completely wiped clean. This was the only way to avoid drawing Li Wei's attention back to Xia City. Luonan formally opened up the virtual work area, ready to take notes at any time. He adjusted the position of the white gauze to make sure that it wouldn't cause any interference. These small actions carried a bit of a ceremonial nature, because what he was about to do was more or less a gamble. Luonan didn't know if the idea he had been mulling over for over 4 months could be considered foolproof. The airships hovering high in the sky were no laughing matter if something went wrong. Not to mention that Spring City had an extraordinary and 7 or 8 B-rank powerhouses. Even if they weren't all enemies, they were just for show. It would be enough to make him suffer. And it was precisely this situation that caused Luonan's heart to churn with excitement like lava. His rationality was still doing its best to display its effect. The excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters he secreted were like race cars on a crowded road. They fought to outdo each other. Yet they formed a kind of dynamic equilibrium that wasn't chaotic in the slightest. Luonan was able to enjoy the pleasure brought by his hormones within this dynamic equilibrium. But he didn't fall into a dull and tasteless state of pure inhibition early on. It was an excellent state. He no longer hesitated. Lightning flashed in his brain, and his soul energy and the external neuron interfered with each other. Not only did they form interference waves, but they also made the wondrous creation that existed between the mind and the material extend out from the center of his brows. It turned into a living nerve that seemed to be a real thing, and it pierced straight through the dark red flesh tissue on the white gauze. Before the external neuron truly made contact, the flesh on the other side was already twitching under the interference wave that arrived in advance. Under the already uneven, dried blood clots and twisted blood vessels, there were even short tentacles extending out. They waved in the air for a while before their length increased. The extended external neuron accurately docked with one of the tentacles. From Luonan's point of view, this was quite a disgusting scene. However, in terms of actual effects, the external neuron that made physical contact with the target would undoubtedly increase the force it exerted on the flesh and blood tissues by 10 or even 100 times. In the virtual brain's interface, the progress of the biochemical reactor's analysis practically climbed to 100% in an instant. During this time, familiar system information such as the culture room has been filled with XXX all-round stem cells. XXX type culture medium has been set. There were also warning windows that popped up one after another that said, the equipment is at 9% integrity. It no longer possesses the ability to self-destruct. There is a risk of biochemical contamination. They all looked very familiar. It was practically carved out of the same mold as the self-destructing reactor. In fact, Luonan really did suspect that these 2 reactor wreckage were used as collectors. They were the result of some sort of fission proliferation. This was just a guess for now. It wasn't a difficulty that he needed to overcome. The true problem lay in the fact that the external neuron had completely docked with the flesh and blood tissues. This clearly violated the conditional format lock that Li Wei had set up. Therefore, the system information that continuously refreshed also popped up one after another. Self-destruct, contamination, reboot, and other words that made one's eyelids twitch. However, the external neuron, which had already achieved a physical docking, displayed a powerful interference power right now. It invaded this mass of flesh and blood tissues in reverse. The relatively simple neuron structure split into large amounts of roots in the shortest amount of time. The roots warped and even directly replaced the original blood vessels and nerves within the flesh and blood tissues. This allowed Luo Nan to realize direct control to the greatest degree. Perhaps the collection and storage system that Li Wei had designed wouldn't be so easily breached, but the problem was that it was currently in an offline hibernation state. Luo Nan had been accumulating power for this, so he easily achieved the desired effect. Luo Nan also knew that this was very likely only a temporary advantage. He had yet to carry out fundamental changes to this mass of flesh and blood from the bottom up. Therefore, Luo Nan didn't delay at all. After the external neuron obtained absolute dominance, a process that had been rehearsed countless times on the program level was launched. A mass of dazzling brilliance shone. It constantly changed shape and contour of electricity. The external neuron acted as a pathway, and it instantly injected into the flesh and blood tissues. In other words, it was the remains of the biochemical reactor. This was the Jintong Soul Light Seed. Luo Nan already knew from the virtual brain system's response that a certain natural connection existed between the Jintong Soul Light Seed and the biochemical reactor. Once they truly intersected, an astonishing reaction would certainly occur. Luo Nan hadn't been in a hurry to advance this process. Instead, he had spent 4 months of time to make all the preparations he could. He had borrowed the enormous database of the virtual brain system to read through all the relevant information and blueprints. He had buried his head in the complex and deep system. Though he could only skim the surface, the time had come. Now was the time to perform practical verification. On the virtual brain's visual interface, the Jintong Soul Light Seed, located at the end of the Wraith sign system, had already fallen off. It brought along its corresponding database and merged into the biochemical reactor's small planet. After merging, the analysis progress of the two was reset to 0 at the same time. Then it started all over again. The speed was very fast, breaking through 20% in the blink of an eye. The system information refreshed at this time, and it began to break free from those boring repetitions. Equipment integrity at 9%. XXX full functional stem cells are undergoing uncontrolled differentiation. The base material has been damaged. A new tinder has been detected. Inspecting the internal layout of the furnace. No corresponding layout method has been found. Searching for the preset layout structure of the system. The electromagnetic department's common layout method. Coincidence rate 97%. Adjustable. Then a warning pop-up window popped out. Do you want to inject a new tinder? Warning. Once injected, it will automatically adjust according to the common layout method. The base material formula needs to be adjusted accordingly. Luo Nan didn't even blink. He simply chose yes. The flesh and blood tissue on the white gauze clearly swelled up at this moment. And on the virtual brain's interface, the reactor had already completely absorbed the database of the Jintong Soul Light Seed. The corresponding interface had changed somewhat. From Luo Nan's perspective, the internal structure diagram that appeared right now was very much like a round drum furnace body. It even had a bit of the fanciful style of the legendary Old Lord's pill refining furnace. It was just that the complex dynamic distribution of the system of point masses inside was much more difficult than starting a fire to refine pills. The point masses endlessly changed their positions under the effects of internal and external forces. The point masses also changed the forces acting on each other. They formed the configuration module that Luo Nan had been researching all this time for nearly half a year. The accumulation of energy grew thicker and thicker. This was the so-called general layout method of the Department of Electromagnetism, the legendary tinder. Luo Nan already had a general understanding of the related concepts after several months of study. he didn't stubbornly dig into the definition. Instead, he drew a few strokes on the virtual work area, forming a vague human silhouette. In that unknown civilization, people can construct a kind of framework that surpasses ordinary life forms. It is the fundamental configuration that runs through the structure of the human body and soul. The user manual calls it a furnace. Its function is to produce an unending stream of higher-level life materials. Some sort of extraordinary gene, golden cell. And on this basis, the mortal body is replaced, life is reformed, and life is realized all the way to transcend the level of life. This was the my heart like a furnace. Luonan drew a circle on the chest and abdomen of the vague human silhouette, representing the fundamental configuration of the furnace. Then he drew a small circle to the side, representing some sort of cheat code. The furnace was supposed to be the core construction of one's body and soul. It didn't rely on external objects for its own needs. But in the end, that unknown civilization was able to realize the simulation of this special configuration, to the point of mass production. This was the flesh and blood tissue before Luonan's eyes. It was the remains of a biochemical reactor. Compared to its own furnace, the original intention of the biochemical reactor was to act as an auxiliary and insurance for a second heart. It stored the host's golden cell, and used external energy to rapidly carry out cell differentiation and tissue repair when the host suffered heavy damage, giving the host a second life. However, it was just like many inventions. The original intention and development of the product would always deviate more or less. What was originally an auxiliary might become a dominant one. But whether it was an auxiliary or a dominant one, the biochemical reactor's functions weren't born out of thin air. The Jintong Soul Light Seed filled it with the core logic of its construction. Luonan had already gathered the raw materials needed for the basic base material formula before he took action. Now it was just a problem of energy injection. It needed energy, especially since the furnace body had suffered damage as high as 91%. The remaining portion had even suffered contamination and modifications. In order to restore it to its complete form, it needed to use the base material to divide and multiply according to the blueprint. This set of processes required an enormous amount of energy. In the beginning, Luonan used the continuous transformation of the body and soul coupling interference power to charge the biochemical reactor. But this was a transformation of mass and energy. The interference on the mental plane made it different from the pure laws of physics. Luonan had a thick accumulation on the mental plane. He could also use the storm turbulence of the abyss region. He could even use the prepared base material raw material to generate a reaction, reducing a large portion of energy consumption. But after this wave, he had a guilty conscience, as if a large hole had been opened at the bottom of the pond. He didn't know how much longer he could last. Luckily, Luonan had made preparations early on. He chose a temporary place to stay, an energy center that provided the city's CBD area. Just when he felt that his strength was lacking, the external neuron split off a side branch and pierced into the energy transmission system. The external neuron skillfully acted as an electric mouse, carrying out another wave of transformation. The efficiency of the electrical energy conversion was quite low. Fortunately, there was an endless stream of energy. Chapter 703. The Jintong Soul Light Seed was the tinder within the furnace. It was the core logic of the operation. From a purely theoretical perspective, Luonan could criticize this logic for not being strict enough. If he wanted to use it, he actually needed the system to correct it. But on the plane of reality, the Soul Light Seed was still the projection of Jintong's life imprint. It was undoubtedly of the extraordinary level in terms of the level of energy manipulation. When it was started and operated, the electricity consumption of the electric mouse really couldn't be satisfied. Not to mention that there was the wreckage of the biochemical reactor behind it, crying piteously for food. Speaking of the biochemical reactor, there was a question. What kind of design could be placed within an object with a cross-section diameter of 3 centimeters? From the level of science and technology on Earth, a silicon anvil of the same volume could be divided into roughly 30 wafers. Each wafer could be arranged with hundreds of billions of field effect tubes, sealing them into a precision chip that was impossible to lack in modern society. With the chip as the core, it could handle an enormous flow of information that far exceeded the limits of the human brain by 1,000 times. It looked like it could do many things, right? But if the chip wasn't given any supporting hardware equipment, its effectiveness wouldn't even be as good as a stack of potato chips of the same size. Returning to the field of life science, such a volume was slightly larger than a human eyeball. Its pure volume was close to that of a thyroid gland, and it was a third the size of a gallbladder. Such an organ in the human body generally only had one or two main functions, and those functions needed to be displayed within the context of the human body's larger system. In the end, any equipment needed to display its function in order to see the system and environment it existed in. At best, there was a high or low degree of dependence. However, this set of theory was a bit unsuitable when applied to the biochemical reactor manufactured by an unknown civilization. This marvelous creation was like a living flesh and blood. It had an astonishing technological foundation, and designed to realize a set of complex functions and outputs. From the information Luo Nan obtained from the Virtual Brain Systems database, a complete night-level basic implantation biochemical reactor was in itself a production line for the proliferation, modification, and processing of stem cells. It gathered the cultivation, differentiation, and modification of all-round stem cells in one body. It used a tinder as its operating core, and through the proliferation of stem cells as a base material, it could realize the repair, remodeling, and strengthening of over 95% of the body's organs. It could even temporarily realize stimulating biochemical modifications. In order to realize these functions, a total of 6 large and small functional divisions were integrated in an area the size of a human eyeball. Their duties were clear, and they cooperated with each other to form a miniature, tight, and comprehensive stem cell processing plant. Without a doubt, this was a little thing that could drive all the biologists, chemists, and physicists on Earth crazy. Even in the unknown civilization presented by the virtual brain system, it was still a relatively advanced technology. The problem was that in order to activate the small factory and realize the incessant fission and proliferation of full-function stem cells, an astronomical amount of energy was required. In an unknown civilization, the night-grade basic implantation biochemical reactor had to be equipped with a set of miniature energy cores. The technical difficulty of this energy core was no less than that of the furnace itself. It consumed special high-energy fuel to generate sufficient energy, and together with the energy output of the powerful host itself, it propelled the furnace to operate. And right now, Luo Nan was temporarily unable to provide this set of miniature energy cores. He was even more unable to find the corresponding high-energy fuel. He could only use his own soul strength to interfere with the abyss region and the material plane. He could use the electrical system on Earth to ensure the corresponding energy support. Ignition was just an insignificant beginning. When the tinder burned fiercely in the furnace, the speed of energy consumption instantly crossed a dangerous limit. The power transmission line of the energy center simply collapsed. Fortunately, the external neuron was in the middle. This marvelous creation existed in the ambiguous zone between the mental and the material. It operated spontaneously according to some rule, using its special mode of existence to replace the power transmission line. It was directly erected between the small reactor and the biochemical reactor at the bottom of the energy center, connecting seamlessly. With this buffer, Luo Nan was able to see the tinder burning fiercely within the furnace. He saw the furnace rapidly expand the scale of its environmental effect. He also saw the raw materials he had thrown in, including the somatic cells he had collected from his own body, realized the initialization, under this kind of environment, induce and transform the cells into all-round stem cells. Then came the rapid fission and proliferation. The single cells, under the catalysis of the endless supply of energy and the unceasing influx of nutrients, quickly took the shape of a flesh and blood creation with initial effects. It first completed the self-renewal of the furnace body, replacing the already contaminated remains of the reactor. It used the fastest speed to add a new environment for the tinder. Afterwards, it followed the established design diagram, endlessly supplementing and perfecting the proper functional division, allowing this miniature factory to enter the fast lane of turnover. Correspondingly, the biochemical reactor plundered the electrical energy of the energy center in an even more direct and unbridled manner. The scorching electricity seemed to pierce through the air at this moment. It danced wildly and crisscrossed in the void, converging from many directions. Luo Nan, who was at the center of the convergence of electricity, seemed like he could turn into charcoal at any time. But in reality, these thrusting electricity passed through the superconducting circuits erected in the void, directly entering the embryonic form of the biochemical reactor's reconstruction. Luo Nan seemed to be in danger, but he was actually safe. Just from a technical perspective. In a certain sense, the biochemical reactor was a new organ that grew outside of Luo Nan's body. But the minute changes inside had long since exceeded the precision limit of Luo Nan's mental senses. It was impossible for the current Luo Nan to dig up the details behind the proliferation of the reactor's main body. He could only refer to the design diagram in the database to deduce the current progress. The progress was much faster than he had imagined, but the resulting impact and consequences were far beyond his expectations. He knew that there was a problem with the power supply of the energy center to the surrounding area. There was a huge problem. Unless Quantum Corporation was completely blind, there was no reason for them not to see it. But he couldn't help but rejoice that he chose the right place to settle down. There were many shopping malls on this side of the central business district. There was no lack of nutrient substances and culture media. Don't look at them as ordinary toys. If one were to strictly follow the laws of mass and energy conversion, the difference in energy consumption would be an astronomical figure. Luo Nan swept up the goods in a frenzy after his successful robbery. Reality proved that his judgment was correct. The only mistake was that he consumed an entire night's supply in a short few minutes. Ruiwan, who was standing guard outside, walked in. She didn't say anything, but Luo Nan knew what she meant. Right now was indeed a critical moment. The airship of Quantum Corporation in the sky had already responded. They directly dropped down 2 Deep Blue squads, a total of 15 Deep Blue walkers. There were 3 B-rank powers among them. Even with Quantum Corporation's resources, this was probably the greatest force they could muster in the shortest amount of time. But Luo Nan's actions in the heart of Spring City caused several powerful people in the city to express their attention. There was an extraordinary among them, and he was of the mental side. The pressure he gave off was even greater, even though it's still a bit lacking. Let's go. Luo Nan spat out a turbid breath and slowly took a step forward. And the biochemical reactor that was connected to the external neuron also felt some sort of pull. It moved closer to his position. When the distance between the two crossed a certain boundary, the mass of flesh and blood that was undergoing reconstruction suddenly expanded into a flesh membrane. It covered Luo Nan's head and face, and the crisscrossing electricity that filled the air gathered together. Luo Nan let out a muffled groan, and a layer of flesh, and fascia that seemed to have just grown rapidly spread out between the gaps of the exoskeleton armor that Luo Nan wore. The thickness of the membrane varied, and there were structures similar to blood vessels and nerves running through it. They were even exposed to the outside. They interweaved and blended together with the exoskeleton, drawing in dazzling electricity. The electricity flowed around Luo Nan's body, naturally forming a unique structure of surging and circulating electricity. It was said to be natural, but this structure was actually pieced together layer by layer in strict accordance with the relevant blueprints. Luo Nan received the stimulation of special information, and the key module that had always been hidden within the visor of his helmet, the divine binding hoop seized from Jin Tong, rose up from beneath Luo Nan's neck like a metal coil that streaked across an electric circuit. The opening of the hoop slightly expanded, drawing in the endlessly stretching fascia and blood vessels, and even the visible and invisible flames of electricity. The hoop streaked across Luo Nan's face to his forehead, and then it slightly contracted, just so happening to be stuck on Luo Nan's forehead. The newly formed fascia and blood vessels, along with the visible flames of electricity, stuck to Luo Nan's head. Only then did the visor of his helmet close. Psychological and physiological stimulation mixed together, forming a trembling feeling that could not be distinguished between hot and cold. It was instantly transmitted to every corner of Luo Nan's limbs and bones, reaching all the way to the ends of his body. It even extended to the void outside of his body, forming a faintly discernible path with the surging and raging flames of electricity in the surroundings. Luonan's will was guided inside without a doubt. Luonan was at a close distance, or perhaps it could be said that there was zero distance between him and the terrifying energy that was enough to turn him into ashes. Under such circumstances, no misdirection or deviation was permitted. If Luonan were to directly stir things up without any preparation, then even 10 or 100 Luonans would die. At this time, the true value of Luonan's 4 months of patience and preparation was reflected. He had already read and studied the spiritual light seed of Jin Tong. It could be said that he had learned the relevant knowledge of the general layout structure of the electromagnetism department. He had grasped the exquisite configuration that could be applied to a berserk electromagnetic environment. Well, Luonan's understanding and application of this configuration was at least 2 levels lower than the condensation ring. But at this very moment, it was enough under these circumstances. Plus, he still had the divine binding hoop. The light restraint on Luonan's forehead gave him a clear texture, and the virtual brain's interface completely reflected Luonan's current body, the fission and proliferation of flesh and blood tissues, and the exoskeleton armor that had been designed and modified long ago. This was the initial construction of a body and soul structure that was suitable for controlling the berserk electromagnetic power. Chapter 704. Report the latest situation in the Abyss Zone. Storm Intensity Level 4. No source of interference found. I repeat, no source of interference found. The frontline commander of this operation, the captain of the forest team, Yuan Mu, confirmed the information with the airship again. The conclusion that entered his ears was like a fat worm covered in burrs that crawled into his brain from his ear canal. It made his facial nerves twitch with a dull pain. The face behind the metal visor probably had a toothache. Yuan Mu subconsciously clenched his teeth. Please convert the storm's influence to the standard unit of interference in the Abyss Zone. No source of interference found. Unable to convert. Just give me a rough range. No source of interference found. Don't you King understand human language? The sudden rise in anger probably frightened the observer on the other side. The other side was silent for a full 10 seconds. Seeing that the destination was right in front of them, the observer replied. If there is indeed a source of interference in the storm, the predicted value is between 5 dg and 15 dg. Not extreme value. Not extreme value. Duration? It has already exceeded 200 seconds. Yuan Mu listened quietly. On the other side, the captain of the Mars team, Spot of Light, sighed and cut to the chase. Crushing 601, and 1501 also kneeling. According to the Abyss Zone Effectiveness Verification Standard of the Inner World, in the absence of obvious interference, the power projected into the Abyss Zone reached or approached 1 standard unit, 1 dg, and maintained a relative stability for 60 seconds. Maintaining a relative stability for 15 seconds under the impact of a combat level, with a lower limit of no less than 0. 1 standard unit, one could be considered a first-rate psychic ability user, and could firmly stand among the ranks of Rank B. Industry insiders simplified it to 2 code names, 601 and 1501. In fact, among Rank B psychics, there were only a dozen or so people who could instantly exceed the limit of power projected to 5 dg. And to maintain this interference force for more than 3 minutes, one could only consider it within the range of extraordinaries. As for increasing it by 3 times, just the thought of it made the fat worm in his ear canal writhe even more violently. It was no wonder that the observer on the airship didn't dare to make such a judgment. The chaotic situation without any source of interference was one thing, but the value that came out of the conversion was beyond reason, which was the most fatal. At this moment, the 2 Deep Blue teams that had descended rapidly from the flying ship had a total of 15 Deep Blue walkers. They had activated their low-altitude maglev thrusters and were gliding noiselessly between the forest of tall buildings. The central CBD area in the north of Spring City was shrouded in darkness. The hundreds of tall buildings were like pillars of smoke painted on the night sky, and the scattered lights that were embellished came from the electronic and lighting equipment of the citizens trapped in this area. In this area, there would be nearly 1 million people every night. With the sudden power outage, the citizens were inevitably in chaos, especially after the backup power supply had a problem. In the face of the rare pitch-black night scene, the calls to the police were flying everywhere, causing the surrounding public security personnel to be overwhelmed. The restless heat spread in the darkness, but just like the chaos windstorm in the Abyss Zone, the center could not be seen at all, and the beginning and end could not be found. The current situation was too strange. The detection equipment of all parties could confirm that a serious accident suspected to have occurred in the energy center that supplied the daily electricity of the CBD area. The electricity produced and converted by the small reactor had leaked out in large quantities, so much so that many lines had been damaged. The energy current that had been forcibly seized did not run too far away, but instead converged in the energy center area, maintaining a high rate of consumption. According to normal logic, this should be someone or some people using the abundant energy in the energy center to drive some equipment. There were many possibilities if one were to consider it from the realm of extraordinary. But all of this became absurd with the huge amount of electricity that far exceeded the norm, and the use of ultra-high power. If the energy center was an extremely high overdraft card, then this card was about to be maxed out. The problem was that no one knew where the POS machine was. The two teams of Deep Blue Walkers could only listen to the judgment of the staff and head towards the designated probability area. In fact, it was a circle drawn with the energy center as the origin. With such information support, in addition to the instant death of the B-rank spiritual type Lan Xiang and the clueless chaos windstorm in the Abyss Zone, it caused the battle-hardened Captain Yuanmu to adopt an extremely conservative attitude towards this mission. When the metal outer armor of his feet touched the outer wall of the energy center building, Yuanmu once again asked the Airship Command Center, "Have there been any new discoveries from the Ability User Association?" After a few seconds, the observer returned with an unsurprising answer. "No." "Then are we fighting with the ghosts of the Abyss Zone? Or the kind that can control thunder and lightning?" The light spot made a joke that was not funny at all. At the very least, few of the 15 members of the two squads, Forest and Fluorescence, plus the 100 or so staff members in the command center of the airship could laugh. At this moment, the two teams landed on the energy center building in succession. It seemed that the only good thing about this place was that it was an office area. At present, they had already gotten off work, and there were only a few people on duty. Moreover, they had already obeyed orders from above to evacuate in time. At least there would be a relatively spacious battlefield if they really encountered any troublesome ghosts, lightning-swallowing aberrations, and the like. Spot of Light was still letting his imagination run wild. Maybe we found an aberration that likes to drink electricity. That bro just had a full meal. What I mean is, it's really hard to imagine that a strong person who just completed a perfect robbery would stay in Spring City until now, and even use this kind of method to lure us all here. Yuanmu calmly said, "Deep Blue has confirmed that the lost item is still in Spring City. What about the exact location? Also, do you want to confirm it again?" Yuanmu fell silent again. This was like facing the stormy weather of the Abyss Zone. He knew that there was definitely a problem, but he could not find the root cause no matter what. In fact, Spot of Light also knew that as operation members, they should not worry about these general issues. They were only weapons, not brains. Complaining and mocking was only to let the other team members understand the danger and severity of the situation. Next, the two captains began to discuss the specific operation plan. "Should we split up? How many numbers do you have in the Abyss Zone? I'm not a psychic. Other than Oak, there's no one here who's psychic. Alright, about 0. 2. If everyone plays with domains, we can occasionally reach the 5 DG limit. It's about the same on my side. Oak may be psychic, but he's more defensive. His limit is about 1. For so, understood. We'll follow your lead." The two captains quickly reached a consensus. The greatest advantage of the Deep Blue Walker system was that they could rely on the format of fire to build a format space and effectively display their collective strength. They could fuse the strength of several, or even dozens of people into a furnace, until they could achieve a powerful power that was close to an extraordinary domain. In the current situation, gathering as much strength as possible was indeed the most reasonable choice. During the process of discussion, the two captains conveniently revised their route of advance. They still maintained a sharp and clear advancing speed, and at the same time, roughly understood the basic structure of the format space. The opponent can instantly kill a blue dragon from a distance. There's a 90% chance that he's psychic. Right now, our intelligence isn't good enough, so it's hard to have a preemptive strike. Therefore, before and after encountering the enemy, defense at the mental level is of utmost importance. Oak, the initial format link will center around you. Resist the first wave. Yes. A muffled voice rang out. It was a short word, but it gave off a rather slow and sluggish feeling. This was Oak, a large man that was 2 meters tall. After wearing the special exoskeleton armor, his height neared 7 meters. He was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Compared to the other deep blue walkers, he seemed more like a cumbersome machine. But aside from the two captains, he was another B-rank powerhouse. Moreover, he was an extremely rare burner that leaned towards the psychic side. The format domain of the 15 deep blue walkers was completed as they advanced. Under the resonance of the archetype format, the format of fire of the 15 people seemed to fuse into one. Every participant was a fulcrum that opened up a bizarre space that spanned across the material and mental planes. Oak was the core pillar within this space, just as Yuan Mu had arranged it. But the others weren't simply energy providers. They maintained a clear and meticulous division of responsibilities. Although they were scattered and running, it was more like they were steering an invisible mothership. Through organic cooperation, the 15 people were integrated together. Speckled encouraged everyone. Let's go. Format Space 7. 0. On the deep blue platform, the official name of this domain was still the format space. Now that it was in its 7th major version, the performance of each version would have a clear increase. In this latest version, the changes had only lasted for a little over 2 months. Only the two top teams, Forest and Mars, had completed their upgrades and the corresponding training and adaptation work. This was a completely different experience from the previous version. Thank you, Professor Luo. The more nervous he was, the more Speckled talked, forming a sharp contrast with Yuan Mu on the other side. This was probably the biggest obstacle for the two teams to break in. 2 minutes later, the deep blue walkers had already passed through the surface of the energy center building and entered the core work area, where the small reactor was installed. In the meantime, Yuan Mu and the Airship Command Center had conducted a few exchanges, but to no avail. We're like an expedition team thrown into a tomb. Speckled mumbled as he used the night vision goggles to observe the surrounding environment. He quickly discovered another problem. Isn't this place too dark? It's too dark, Yuan Mu said at almost the same time. The other members also gave feedback on this problem. No matter how the night vision goggles adjusted their mode and parameters, it was very difficult to clearly image the surrounding environment. Chapter 705. A few seconds later, the command center contacted Yuan Mu and said that there was a problem in the area the operation team was in. The observer lady said, according to the blueprints, the nearby walls are made of special materials such as electromagnetic shielding cement, which limits the electromagnetic activity in the relevant area. If we go deeper, communication might be blocked, and EMP-type electromagnetic weapons will also be restricted. Yuan Mu and Spot of Light looked at each other. In the dimming light, they could barely see each other's cold metal visors. In such an environment, Yuan Mu subconsciously pressed on the communication module, trying to use external force to make the conversation smoother. Listen, I've worked with conductive cement before. This thing is really useful, but it's not a material that completely absorbs. It should reflect and refract, do you understand? The problem now is that we can't see anything, even if we use night vision equipment. Including your conclusion, visible light, infrared, and perhaps a wider range of electromagnetic waves are all lacking in our area. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. Under normal circumstances, the environment that humans lived in should be a pot of boiling soup where radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays of different frequencies, wavelengths, and energy levels were intertwined and stirred. Some had more, some had less, and when they met with matter, they would pass through, refract, or be absorbed. Humans were bombarded by electromagnetic waves all the time, and had already adapted and actively used this environment as an important way of perceiving the world. And now the situation that the Deep Blue team, Forest and Fluorescence were facing was that the closer they got to the reactor, the thinner the electromagnetic waves became, to the point that some layers had even formed a continuous void. This was not a natural phenomenon, nor was it a reasonable interference phenomenon. A monster that swallows electricity. Spot of Light was not in the mood for a long explanation, and only emphasized the key words before turning to the only person in the team who was psychic. Oak, give an answer, even a guess is fine. Oak had been trying to do a more detailed exploration of the surrounding environment, and the formatted space had given him a lot of support. At least, he could reach from the abyss to the electromagnetic environment on the material plane. This was a shocking breadth, but it was not easy to get a clear answer. He was silent for more than 10 seconds, and then suddenly went against the tactical order, and turned on the headlamp on his helmet. The blinding light tore through the darkness and headed straight for the end of the tunnel. Fortunately, the sensitivity of the instrument was extremely high, and the parameters were automatically adjusted, so the tragedy of a group of people suddenly became real blind was avoided. Oak. As soon as Yuan Mu's rebuke was heard, the sudden increase in the brightness of the outside world decreased at a visible rate. In the eyes of the members of the operation team, the darkness was like a virus that spread wantonly, killing every single photon in the air. It even swarmed to the light source on Oak's forehead, and after a few breaths, there was only a faint cold light coming from there, and it was quickly dimming. Under the dim light, everyone was silent. Oak then said, "Electromagnetic waves are matter, and also energy. Energy and matter will not disappear into thin air." Rather than saying that it was an answer or a guess, it was more like a rule of the normal world. This rule was very strict. Even if it seemed to be on the verge of collapse under the impact of extraordinary powers, it could still limit the change of all things in the world. If the actual situation seemed to deviate from it, then the basic direction was clear. And Oak's experiment showed that the actual situation was much more violent and intense than previously imagined. The two captains looked at each other again, and simultaneously thought of a significant change on another level. Abyssal storm? Yuan Mu stated his basic guess, and Spot had the courage to show his imagination. That is to say, this is probably a reverse interference. The electricity that leaked out, including most of the electromagnetic waves in this area, was transferred to the abyssal area through a certain channel, forming that storm. The monster that swallowed electricity doesn't exist, or rather, its stomach is in the abyssal area. Yuan Mu frowned. Why? Do we need him to show us the relevant paper? Spot directly turned off the night vision goggles. It was meaningless to turn on the equipment in such an environment. He would rather believe in the well-tempered format of fire, and the formatted space built on that foundation. Yuan Mu soon realized that it was pointless to get to the bottom of it. The spreading darkness was just a byproduct, a hole formed by stripping the ubiquitous electromagnetic waves from the side of the body. The truly terrifying enemy was still in the depths of the darkness. So he quickly ordered, "Switch to pure sensory mode. Oak, activate sensory sharing. Fortress detection module will be activated in 10 seconds. After giving the order, Yuan Mu thought of Oak's previous extreme behavior, which was obviously different from usual. He also knew that as a psychic, Oak was under more pressure than the others. After hesitating for a moment, he asked in private, "Can you hold on?" Oak did not directly respond, but simply carried out the order. Soon, the eyes of the team members lit up again, and the sensory results were reconstructed according to the information integration mode they were used to, temporarily freeing them from the predicament of being blind. But with the corresponding increase in consumption, their resistance to psychic attacks would also decrease. There was a high chance that when facing a psychic enemy, they would have to cut themselves. That was a compromise to reality. No commander would be willing to make such a decision. Yuan Mu could only try to calm himself down and re-examine the situation in the formatted space. At that moment, one of the team members finally couldn't take it anymore and spoke in the tactical channel. If we're also a source of radiation, does that mean we're being absorbed too? The silence persisted for about 5 seconds. Spot chuckled. Perhaps. Right now we've already entered a certain gentleman's domain. A person who can control light. How should I express this? Electromagnetic domain? Lightrider? The exoskeleton armor's communication module issued a warning as soon as he finished speaking, indicating that communication with the outside world had been seriously affected. In the next second, the two teams' communication with the airship's command center was cut off. Yuan Mu was just about to try to rouse the team's morale when he heard Oak's muffled groan. Then came a pure and direct attack from the psychic plane. The erected sensory network immediately collapsed. 15 deep blue walkers were suddenly thrown onto the isolated island. What greeted them was a wave of stifling darkness. Chapter 706. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Even an experienced first-line commander like Yuan Mu couldn't make an accurate and comprehensive judgment of the current situation in a short second. Therefore, he could only choose to apply the established paradigm: Barker's defense. The so-called Barker's defense was the basic paradigm of defending and counterattacking in response to the simultaneous arrival of mental attacks and electromagnetic interference. After giving the order, Yuan Mu fully ignited his own format of fire. He replaced the reckless Oak who had been attacked head-on, and became the perceptual core of the entire formatted space. Formatted Space version 7.0. The format of fire of the 15 deep blue walkers and their corresponding energies formed a special space similar to a flying ship. Everyone had a specific position that could be adjusted at any time to form a joint force and construct a powerful offensive and defensive module. This kind of combination was actually beyond one's intuition. Even if everyone was well trained, they would only be able to truly master it in the last 2 or 3 weeks. As the captain, Yuan Mu's degree of mastery over this form was a cut above everyone else's. Right now he was like a captain piloting a flying ship through a fierce and surging storm, doing his best to maintain the ship's balance. This was hard work, but Yuan Mu's mind was roused. His judgment wasn't wrong. Yuan Mu guided and operated the format of fire to capture a substantial attack in the boundless darkness. This also caused the structure of the formatted space to automatically adjust and contract, forming an even more stable defense. It maintained a state of harmony under the attack and waited for an opportunity to act. At the same time, Yuan Mu also felt that the black tide that was pouncing towards him actually didn't have a clear distinction between the mental and the material plane. It was very difficult to categorize it. It was indeed like a storm in the night. No one could tell whether the droplets that struck their bodies were ordinary water droplets or highly corrosive acid before they received further damage. The space constructed by the format of fire was currently resisting the pure force of the attack. As for the deeper ones, brilliant electric fire suddenly exploded in the darkness. The twisted and forked rays of light were like stiff demonic claws, rolling up the surrounding shadows on the walls and slashing over. The scene was sinister and terrifying, but Yuan Mu's mind suddenly relaxed. His judgment was correct again. The Barker's defense already utilized the exoskeleton armor in conjunction with the format of fire structure that was preset within the dynamo core to form an equipotential shield on the surface of every person's body. In principle, it could shield most high-voltage electric fields and electromagnetic wave damage for a short period of time. Before he could finish his thought, a cool electronic wind brushed past his face, and his pores relaxed. But what followed was a chill that seeped into his flesh and bones, as well as a restless impact that was buried deep within. Not good. The double barrier of the format of fire and the exoskeleton armor was like a layer of useless thin paper. Like a high-voltage electric current piercing into his body, Yuan Mu's body and consciousness instantly went stiff. His muscles twitched violently instinctively, even cracking some of his joints and bones. Pain and numbness intertwined. He lost control of his body and fell to the ground. The dull sound of metal colliding with the ground came from all around. It was continuous, and there seemed to be a few curses from the spots of light in the middle. Those were his subordinates. There was no doubt that the 14 Deep Blue Walkers had suffered the same attack and met the same fate. The Deep Blue Walker Squad, which represented the two peak configurations of the forest and Mars, had been annihilated. There was a moment when Yuan Mu's breathing stopped. His heart felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. He thought he was going to die. But in the end, there was no fatal impact. The Grim Reaper's fingertip brushed past his heart, and then nimbly avoided it. Only the electric shock and burn marks were left on his body. Did everyone suffer the same result? Or was he the only survivor? Yuan Mu had already lost most of his perceptual abilities. The only thing lingering in his mind was the noise after the electric current had struck. At long last, the firm willpower he had tempered over the years allowed his thoughts to coalesce once more. It also allowed that ever-expanding question to fill his brain. Why didn't the Barker-style defense work? Perhaps Yuan Mu had carried out too many useless thoughts, which didn't help him solve the problem. Instead, it allowed his central nervous system to recover some of its sensitivity. The ground was shaking. It was the rhythmic tapping of metal against the ground. It seemed to be the sound of someone's footsteps. That person. Yuan Mu's fingertip twitched. This was already the most difficult move he could perform in a short amount of time. Only his thoughts were still working. It was very close to what the intelligence had indicated. A spiritual-type expert wearing an exoskeleton armor. The rhythmic footsteps brushed past him. They gradually approached, stuck close, and gradually moved further away. It was a natural step, but it brought about an irrepressible trembling feeling. The footsteps suddenly stopped. That person should be standing in the middle of the dozen or so Deep Blue Walkers that had fallen and stiffened. Perhaps he was admiring his own masterpiece. Perhaps he was considering how to deal with the next step. Yuan Mu vaguely felt a sinister and ice-cold power. It was like the previously harmless electronic wind that had cut into him. Only this time, there was no follow-up attack. The silence grew increasingly sharp. Yes, that person was observing. It was as if he could directly observe the activity of their brains. He could see through their trembling and fear. At least in Yuan Mu's case, he felt as if his own skull had been flipped open. Every layer of cortex, every nerve, the bioelectricity transmitted, and even the information they carried were all exposed to the other party's open and above-board observation. This was a maddening thought. It was also a challenge to the limits of his willpower. If possible, Yuan Mu would certainly explode with the format of fire and incinerate everything around him. However, he was already powerless to do anything. The difference between the levels of the two was too great. At this very moment, Yuan Mu's mind had already placed this enemy on the level of an extraordinary. Moreover, it was a natural enemy that had an extremely strong restraining effect on the Deep Blue Walkers. Wait. Yuan Mu suddenly understood. No wonder the Barker-style defense was useless. For a natural enemy, the electromagnetic field was just a carrier of extraordinary power. The opposite was also true. The electromagnetic field. The mental side. These two key pieces of information were combined together. They were sufficiently mixed and interfered with each other. This was undoubtedly the nightmare of Earth's current technological side. The core of the Deep Blue Walkers was admittedly the burner, but the platform they used to display their abilities was a technological side product. Under the control of the electromagnetic field, the Deep Blue Walkers were simply like toys that could be tossed about. Natural enemy. The corner of Yuan Mu's mouth twitched. A feeling of exhaustion surged up, transforming into a tide of darkness. It drowned his entire body, halting his nearly despairing train of thought. Oh my, it's finally over. Luonen let out a long breath as he walked along the pitch-black corridor. Due to these slight vibrations, the layer of skin and tendons that adhered to his body suddenly turned into flying ash. There were even specks of sparks falling in between. The high-voltage electric current that passed through here captured the closest good conductor. It looked as if it was about to backfire. The soul-binding hoop hummed and trembled, effectively restraining the operation of the electromagnetic field. It diverted the powerful electric current that could injure Luo Nan into the void. The electric current collided with the storm in the abyss and dissipated into nothingness. Good stuff. Luo Nan still didn't know where Jin Tong obtained this piece of equipment. But as far as the virtual brain system was concerned, the soul-binding hoop was indeed one of the most suitable equipment for ability users of the mental side. It was especially effective in the aspect of electromagnetic and supernatural powers. Jin Tong's being able to obtain this piece of equipment was indeed a great fortune. But he had actually become a fleshly body. Luo Nan really didn't understand what sort of twists and turns were going on inside. Unfortunately, ordinary base materials were simply unable to withstand the pressure of an extraordinary. The biochemical reactor was a product that consumed a lot of energy. He was able to display it to his heart's content for a few dozen seconds at best before it turned into flying ash and smoke. Luo Nan finally understood why Chief Li Wei would spend so much time and effort to gather the raw materials required for the advanced formula. This restriction, as well as the bright prospects that could be touched upon, made Luo Nan a bit excited, let alone Li Wei. It could be imagined that if the advanced formula was used in the biochemical reactor to burn and forge materials with a bearing capacity of 3 to 5 times that of ordinary base materials, the success rate of the hunting operation in the cloud world would increase to over 60% at the very least. But looking at it from a realistic point of view, this didn't seem to be any easier than hunting Gong Qi himself. Luo Nan let out a breath and took off the exoskeleton armor, which was already a bit deformed. This toy was basically unusable, but it couldn't be carelessly thrown away. Otherwise, it might reveal some clues. Fortunately, it was a lightweight piece of equipment. A slightly larger suitcase was enough to hold it. After a bit of packing, Luo Nan called out, "Ruiwen." The little girl appeared noiselessly beside him. She pressed down on the suitcase, then she disappeared. She should be at the forward operating base 500 kilometers away when she reappeared. There's no need to be anxious. Luo Nan seized the time to remind her. Ruiwen certainly consumed energy to travel through space. Though she had never complained of being tired, it was hard for others to guess where her limits were. Luo Nan wasn't willing to challenge this, so he gave Ruiwen ample time to adjust. Luo Nan took advantage of the current electromagnetic interference that was still present. All the sensing equipment was limited, and he slowly walked out of the energy center building. He seamlessly joined the stream of people cursing and fumbling within the pitch-black night. It wasn't easy for him to complete the experiment, but all the materials were gray. All he heard was a sound. Fortunately, he wasn't completely without harvests. At the very least, he understood that it wasn't easy to control the electromagnetic configuration. He was still far from being able to do as he pleased. He could only follow the few simple paradigms presented by the virtual brain system. He imitated them and tried to combine them. He still needed a lot of practice if he really wanted to use it in actual combat against an extraordinary like Gong Qi. The problem was that the base materials had become consumables. This was something that burned money. Oh, it wasn't like there was no way to solve this problem. Chapter 707. Luo Nan walked briskly on the main street. He was surrounded by a bustling stream of people. Everyone walked hurriedly. The lights on their wristbands and various electronic devices lit up. They flew and rotated in the surroundings along with their body movements. It was as if Luo Nan's consciousness was cruising within the storm of the Abyss region. The storm of the Abyss region had yet to subside. The powerful electromagnetic field that was introduced through the electromagnetic configuration had undergone a partial mutation. It mixed together with the never-ending turbulence of the Abyss region to form an extremely effective reverse interference. It interweaved with the effects of the storm of the Abyss region on the material plane. Together, they formed the source of the blackout in the CBD region. Luo Nan did not solidify his configuration in the Abyss region. It wasn't that he couldn't, it was that he didn't need to. He was different from the vast majority of ability users. He was affected by the Wraith sign. He came and went freely within the storm and turbulence of the Abyss region. Even if he broke away from absolute observation mode, The secret text of I reflected in the abyss region would only become more powerful with the vast ocean-like accumulation of soul strength. Luo Nen was able to freely switch between absolute observation and normal mode. This experience not only gave Luo Nen secrecy and convenience, but it also gave him a free and calm control. Therefore, he was able to transcend the abyss region and set off a large-scale storm. The most technical aspect was that he was able to choose the parts that affected the abyss region. He could freely switch between them or connect them in series or in parallel. For example, at this moment, the mysterious character, I, was reflected in the abyss region under the support of the Wraith sign. It was completely empty, like a pedestrian that overlapped with the surrounding dark scenery. However, there were two sources of light on its body. One was the condensation ring configuration, and the other was the electromagnetic configuration. The condensation ring was the carrier for the expansion of perception, and the other formed an enormous source of interference. The two operated in parallel, forming a domain that could make one vomit blood. The condensation ring configuration, which had been tempered 1,000 times, was relatively introverted and stable. The electromagnetic configuration, which had just been condensed, was much more lively. It flew and revolved around the secret text of I. It shone with resplendent light. Every time it converged, there would be a slight change. It adapted to the environment of the abyss region and resonated with the material plane. It seemed omnipotent to control the omnipresent electromagnetic field. Luo Nen did not think of himself as Zeus. He did not forget that he was just a middle school student who solved problems according to established paradigms. Therefore, he was generally quite calm. On the other hand, the electromagnetic configuration did not break away from the scope of formatting theory. It could still be controlled and explained by the self-format. This was something he was very pleased about. Speaking of which, during this period of time, he was able to break away from the fixed pattern, and it felt even better. It was just like riding a motorcycle in the wilderness during the day. Now that he was walking on the crowded streets of the city, there was also a sense of freedom and pleasure, especially when there was a layer of darkness that he had personally created around him. This feeling was different from when he was in the wilderness. Over there, he could do anything he wanted. But here, he had to do something no matter what. There were people passing by him at all times. If Luo Nen wanted to, he could make these people dance according to his will. There was practically no difficulty at all. That should be quite interesting, but also quite scary. Luo Nen was amused by his own thoughts. He clapped his hands and naturally received the cutting gazes of the surrounding people. Everyone, you don't have to thank me. I'm just a young man with a high moral standard. Luo Nen chuckled again. In any case, no one here recognized him. He wouldn't have the omnipresent location of the psychic wave network, and he wouldn't have to walk on the streets with the security arrangements of open and hidden sentries. Brother Ikuan, I love you, but you should just die from your position as a bodyguard. Live on as a sparring partner. Luo Nen's footsteps grew more and more agile. He hummed the guitar song that Rue went often practiced. He walked a long distance before he began to count down. 3, 2, 1. The electric current passed through millions of wires. The constrained electric and magnetic fields flipped back and forth, driving countless motors and gears. They also radiated a chaotic mess of high and low frequency bands. The light here was like the continuous notes played by a pianist's fingers. They appeared in a clear rhythm, and then they ended with a glorious chorus of accents. The buzzing of electrical appliances filled every building and every street. The background noise became clamorous, but this was the breathing sound of life in today's city. The tens of thousands of people on the streets let out sighs of relief. There were even louder cheers. Of course, there were also curses in between. But no matter what, the electricity had come. Luo Nen stretched his body under this piece of light. I'm done. Pack up. The transition between darkness and light brought about a new wave of chaos. Luo Nen threaded his way through the stream of people going back and forth. He soon turned a corner and headed down from this shopping mall to where he had placed his off-road motorcycle. It wasn't even 11 o'clock at night. He would take advantage of the night to walk another 500 kilometers of mountain roads, and return to the forward operating base. If the airdrop went smoothly and the deviation was small, he would be able to make it in time for tomorrow's breakfast. Aside from nutritious soup, he would also be able to have Cat Eyes bring a portion of tofu pudding. Perfect. Luo Nan turned into the elevator lobby of the shopping mall. It was already quite late, and with the addition of the power outage, the flow of people at the scene of the shopping mall was quite low. Everyone didn't have the mood to continue strolling, let alone those unlucky bastards who had been trapped on the higher floors. Most people were like Luo Nan. They took the elevator to the parking lot and prepared to leave. Therefore, the 10 elevators in the elevator lobby were unexpectedly full for several waves in a row. He shook his head and simply left the elevator lobby. He prepared to take the fire escape route. There were many other people who had the same idea. It was bustling with activity. Luo Nan mixed into the stream of people and walked forward at a pace that was neither fast nor slow. But there was still a distance between him and the fire escape door when his eyelids blinked. Oh my, the efficiency is off the charts. On Luo Nan's sensor network, police cars were closing in on the vicinity of the off-road motorcycle that was a key marker. The special police force members didn't wait for the motorcycle to come to a complete stop before jumping off one by one to protect the technicians. They used the mentality of removing mines and explosives to surround the novice motorcycle that had only traveled 500 kilometers. Oh, that's not right. It was more like some sort of boss going on patrol. Should he snatch it back? Forget it. He didn't have any enmity with the Spring City government or the military. He had already gone a bit overboard today, so he shouldn't push their nerves any further. Luo Nan's thoughts changed and he basically said goodbye to this off-road vehicle that he had just obtained not too long ago. What awaited it was perhaps to be dismembered into 8 pieces by the analysis center and be thoroughly investigated for any and all clues. Actually, it was quite easy to drive. Luo Nan gave a sigh of grief for his own mount. He deviated from the route and walked straight out of the shopping mall. There was a slight change in his plans. Right now he needed to find an off-road vehicle. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the ability to jump across the air. He would most likely break his legs if he really wanted to traverse a 500-kilometer mountain road. No matter what he wanted, he needed to have money. Luo Nan opened the virtual interface of his wristband and looked at the reserves in his personal treasury. One of the benefits of being an ability user, especially a relatively high-level ability user, was that it was unlikely that he would be short on money. Especially during these 4 months, Luo Nan had opened up a few theory classes in a very unfriendly manner. Let's not talk about the reception of the classes themselves. Quite a sizable amount of credits and honor points entered his account every time. Credits were used in the secular world, while honor points were used in the inner world. No matter which side he was in, he was quite a wealthy landlord. Relative to his age. Yep, he could search for the nearest off-road vehicle specialty store. Cragburst was fully deserving of his authority in this field. Luo Nan possessed basic common sense under his influence. It wasn't difficult to choose a suitable consumable for the time being. Luo Nan prepared to search on the internet. Of course, he absolutely couldn't use his wristband. Otherwise, the SCA would laugh until they cried. Hold on. Luo Nan suddenly thought of an extremely critical problem. Speaking of which, how am I going to pay? It must be known that this was a society of information, a society of the Internet of Things, and a society of authority. Legal residents only had one ID. All of their personal actions, network traces, and terminal consumption were all expended from this ID account. Even if the government blew the skies and placed privacy in the most important position, Luo Nan knew very well that practically everyone was transparent when faced with the government's machinery and capital power. As long as the SCA willed it, a person's time, place, store, method of consumption, amount of consumption. These basic information were simply like thick ink marks scribbled on a piece of white paper. They were clear, accurate, and completely exposed. Just like how he couldn't connect to the internet in broad daylight, he couldn't spend money in broad daylight either. The situation was even more serious. He could use the external neuron to create a shortcut when it came to connecting to the internet. But if he used the external neuron for things like transactions where both parties were willing to do it, was this a robbery? Of course, the authority network of the secular world couldn't cover everything. Back then, Luonan was able to find a channel like the Secret Star Forum to sell prohibited chemical compounds. For ability users, there were far too many channels for transactions. It was said that every secret organization and religion had their own internal transaction network. Xia City had an even higher-level psychic wave network. Of course, the most common was the intranet of the Ability User Society, known as the Wilderness Explorers Society. That place was a completely lawless place. The SCA didn't have any authority to speak of. Luonan had done quite a few transactions on the society's intranet. The convenience of the intranet was not much worse than that of the secular world. However, even if it was the society's intranet, the nature of the information, the IoT, and the authority society didn't change. The major powers who controlled the resources of the network could strip away all sorts of privacy protections at any time to peek at the most core secrets. Luonan, a hot topic who should have been studying in Xia City, doing experiments and doing research, didn't use any means of transportation. He didn't have any travel information, but he appeared 2,000 kilometers away on the streets of Spring City in the span of a few hours. He even bought an off-road motorcycle through the society's intranet. If he really did it, the various intelligence organizations of the inner world would no longer need to worry about their bonuses for the month. Chapter 708. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. The female's sharp voice played back and forth. This special ringtone made everyone in the bar raise their eyebrows. A nightclub man had been staring at his target for a long time. He was just about to make a move when his outstretched hand froze in midair. At this time, the half-drunk woman lying on the bar raised her eyelids and raised her hand. Her wristband sensed the gesture and automatically connected. Hello? Oh, secretary, he. A voice that was extremely similar to a ringtone rang out. Because she was sleepy, the voice was a bit hoarse. It's private time right now. I've turned off the internet. Where is he? How would I know? In any case, he's not in my bed. Rui-1? That little girl loves to play hide and seek the most. You count to 10 and then call out. Maybe she'll jump out. TSK. You're really annoying. Cat Eyes struggled to sit up from the bar and shook her head. She shook her head to get rid of the wine in front of her eyes. She grabbed the half-empty glass of wine next to her and splashed it on the face of the scheming nightclub man. Amidst a mix of panicked cries and excited screams, she supported herself on the bar and stood up. She clearly had the appearance of a drunken cat that could fall to the ground at any time. But she slapped the nightclub man, who wanted to get back at her, to the ground. Then she swayed her steps and walked out amidst gazes of astonishment, admiration, yearning, and greed. The call was already disconnected. Cat Eyes was annoyed. Why did they come to find me when they couldn't find him? Could it be that the abnormal relationship between the two of them was completely exposed? That secretary, if she really wanted that Luo guy, then she should learn from her and develop an abnormal relationship. Cat Eyes had similar thoughts. She was more active when she drank. Outside the bar, she felt the cool breeze of late spring. Cat Eyes was more or less completely awake. He Wayne still had some bureaucratic ability to be muddle-headed. She would often turn a blind eye to Luonan's behavior that went beyond common sense. It could be considered indulgence, but it could also be considered respect. But once she really did go by the book, then it proved that Luonan had stirred up trouble. At the very least, he was highly suspicious. It had only been a few days of peace. Cat Eyes let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to communicate with her boss through the sealed system network, the other side sent back a message wave ahead of her. Speak of the devil. Emergency. Luonan's consciousness really did appear to be quite urgent. He even asked a question that Cat Eyes found to be quite high level, but it was also an extremely suspicious question. Aside from the intranet of the inner world, are there any other convenient and secretive transaction models? I'm talking about global networking, the kind that's very common. Where are you? Cat Eye's words hit the nail on the head. She also revealed the latest news in a rather exaggerated manner. In order to find you, secretary, he almost plowed through Xia City. The person on the other end was silent for 2 seconds before replying, Spring City. Huh. Cat Eye's already bright pupils dilated a little. She was truly interested. She simply sat on the curb of the road. Her long legs, which seemed to glow like a man's, were spread open. Even though she was covered by shorts, she still wantonly attracted the attention of the opposite sex, and even the same sex around her. Tell me in detail. If you don't explain the situation, how am I supposed to know what you're up to? Aya. What's there to hesitate about? I won't laugh at you. A minute later, this bold and gloomy girl burst into laughter, as if no one was around. She nearly fell backwards. Her sharp laughter painted the scene she had created with her own hands. It painted an even brighter color. It scared away a few people, but it attracted even more people. Cat Eyes turned a blind eye to this. She just laughed at the boss who dominated her life to her heart's content. Oh my God. Why do you have to be so stubborn as to crash into a specialty store? There are so many on the streets. Fine. There are a few professional off-road cars, but aren't your eyes and ears the most well-informed? It's just a trifling Spring City. You've gone through the Civ-style Earthwheel twice. Are you afraid that you won't be able to find a suitable car? The person on the other end was silent for a moment. Finally, a shout was heard. Isn't that just stealing? How can I do that kind of thing? This shout was not so much a rejection of morality. It was better to say that it was a shameful anger that came from a brain turning a corner. Cat Eyes grinned. Wait a minute. Let me look at the news. TSK. Spring City's Central Business District. Over 20 minutes of power outage. This kind of loss should be in the tens of millions. You've just burned someone's tens of millions, and now you're even arguing about a car. Boss, your way of thinking is truly rare in the world. I'm impressed. How can accident and intentional compare? The voice on the other end gradually weakened. It was obvious that he couldn't find a more convincing reason. At this time, Cat Eyes took a step back. Fine. After all, this is an atypical situation. But are you sure you don't want to use a quick and convenient method? Of course. The bitter taste of reaping the fruits of one's own actions seemed to seep in from 2,000 kilometers away. Cat Eyes laughed in satisfaction at this, but she didn't want to go too far. In the end, a lawful boy was better than a chaotic boss. She thought about how a certain person had a bag full of money but couldn't spend it. His methods were wrapped in a cocoon of his own making. He was all alone 2,000 kilometers away. It was quite pitiful. So she generously offered a solution. Isn't it easy to spend the money? I'll send you an app. You install it on your wristband. I don't need to say more about the security measures. You can't do anything else, but you can still use it temporarily. The other side also felt relieved. He thanked her over and over, completely lacking the demeanor of a boss. Unfortunately, there were strict and even harsh restrictions on the authority of the closed system. Such an intense contrast made it hard for the dark clouds in the bottom of Cat Eyes' heart to be blown open, scattering the radiance of delight. The wristband rang again. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. The corner of Cat Eyes' mouth twitched. In the end, she still accepted the call with a slight arc, seeing how the other side called out Sister Cat Eyes several times. I'll give you a cover. While Cat Eyes was weaving her web of lies, Luonan had just finished downloading the app through the link provided by Cat Eyes in Xia City 2,000 kilometers away. Cat Eyes reminded him that he needed to take proper security measures. Luonan was even more ruthless. He directly downloaded the app onto his external neuron, the virtual brain system. Let's see what can trick him this time. The name of the app was very straightforward. It was called Transaction. The first interface that opened after installation was a three-dimensional map of the world. Hundreds and thousands of dots of light were scattered across the map like scattered stars. They were distributed in various locations around the world. Looking carefully, Luonan discovered that these dots of light were not only located in the world's 88 large metropolitan areas, but they were also scattered throughout the vast non-urban areas. Cat Eyes didn't explain too much to him, but the novice guide built into the app was quite humane. Luonan soon realized that each of these thousands of dots of light was a hidden transaction location. The foundation of their existence was the vagabond tribes that were inharmonious with the modern metropolis civilization. They were located in every corner of the world. That's right. These transaction locations were established by vagabonds of the wilderness. They followed the migration of the vagabond tribes and moved without end. The transaction locations represented by each dot of light weren't necessarily accurate. They were constantly changing. They were reflected on the app, and they weren't refreshed in real time. However, with the implementation of the Vagabond Act in recent years, large amounts of vagabonds returned to the cities. Many of the tribe's transaction locations entered the cities as well. Their existence was reasonable. Their existence was demand. These flea markets, that were completely separated from the social network of authority, had their own value to vagabonds, to ability users, and to certain people who sought convenience. They were able to survive within the cracks of policy and human relations. They had a far more stable environment than the wilderness. The app showed that there were 2 vagabond transaction locations, in Spring City alone. There was a brief description of the goods and information. Online shopping didn't exist here. Only face-to-face transactions were possible. Due to the special nature of the transaction locations, the barter model was a bit more popular. If one wanted to use credits or honor points, one would have to pay a rather heart-wrenching commission fee. Luonan first confirmed the goods, and then looked at the distance. He finally chose the U-Hole market that was about 40 kilometers away from the CBD. Yep. This was the closest one. He still needed to check the bus routes. Wait a minute. If he didn't want to leave behind any traces and maintain his moral standards, then this method wouldn't do. Hiss. Luonan raised his head to look at the night sky that was once again obscured by light pollution. He suddenly felt that it would be quite good to burn off a few tens of millions. Luonan had recently been learning stealth and rapid movement techniques from Red Fox. He hadn't given up on the cultivation of the 9 orifices 6 roots technique. His physical fitness was still steadily increasing. However, running a marathon that was twice as fast as the world record was still tiring. And this was the plateau. It was already midnight in Spring City when Luonan entered the recycling stratum of Spring City, while panting slightly according to the route indicated by the app. The sound of his panting was exceptionally clear in the silent and dark alleys of the building. It attracted the gazes of many people in the shadows. It was said that the 88 large metropolitan circles were all the work of copy and paste. Then the copy wasn't just the bright side. There were also the shadowy areas of the recycling stratum that the sunlight couldn't reach. Compared to the bustling business district, the recycling stratum of any city couldn't be put on the table, even though they were only a fine line away from bustling. This evoked a few hazy memories in Luonan's mind. He had come to a similar place when he was in Xia City. Back then he was still a crow. Cough. Actually, his soul was attached to Ink's body. He and Cragburst had turned that area upside down. It was also there that he had rescued Rue-1. Speaking of which, gangsters seem to really like the Beast faction's off-road vehicles. If someone were to jump out and yell robbery, wouldn't he be able to immediately kill them? No, snatch them back? This didn't violate basic morality, and it was much more convenient than going to some market or exchange. Luonan really did have a bit of expectation when his thoughts reached this point. But Luonan was soon disappointed. The sensor network in front of him fully displayed the surrounding geographical environment of the U-Hole market. It was different from the remains of the highway in Xia City that connected the inner and outer parts of the city. What ran through most of the lower stratum was an underground river that gradually meandered into the ground. Chapter 709. Since Luonan was unable to take shortcuts, the so-called robbery and counter-robbery became dull and uninteresting. However, there were some people hidden in the shadowy corners. They held a deep interest in a target who was walking alone in a narrow alley near midnight. There were more than one greedy gaze that roamed Luonan's body in an attempt to find traces of luxury goods. There were also some people who had purer inclinations towards happiness. It was a long night. Finding a random person to pass the time was good. Of course, there were even more people who had completely indifferent attitudes towards the people and matters in the corners of the alleys. They shut their doors and windows and went to sleep, saving energy for tomorrow's livelihood. Or they tossed and turned in their own little world. This was the recycling stratum. Low-income people, vagrants, gangs, vagabonds. In short, they were people who had yet to adapt to this society. They injected chaotic emotions and colors into this area. In terms of spectrum, it wasn't to the point of despair, but it was quite far from normal. Emotions and desires were directly visible in Luo Nan's eyes, but he didn't believe that comprehending the mysteries within was an easy matter. If he were to make an inappropriate analogy, it would be like an electromagnetic wave. Visible light was only a small and insignificant part of its long spectrum. There were far too many other deadly things hidden deep within the indescribable layers. Luo Nan was just like the brilliant sun wheel that was rolling within the abyss. Even though it was separated by an endless distance of space and time, it transmitted a tiny bit of heat. The divine ability it created made Luo Nan feel deep fear and reverence. Every time Luo Nan tried to understand it, he would always have the painful experience of drawing fire to his body. Even his body and mind would be out of balance for a few days. After a few times, his entire body was on the verge of collapse. In comparison, the ice-cold virtual brain system seemed much more amiable. In recent months, Luo Nan had devoted himself to the preparatory work of planning his hunt in the clouds. It had been a long time since he had taken the initiative to warm himself. Tonight, he was affected by the emotional atmosphere of the recycling stratum. His telepathic thoughts drifted over, and was unexpectedly scorched. His mind was a bit gloomy. He didn't have the mood to play the game of snatching and counter-snatching. He simply released a bit of mental oppression. It didn't have much lethality, but it was enough to make the brains of the people around him feel as if they were being pricked by needles. Whoever had more evil thoughts would suffer a more miserable backlash. Luo Nan had been roasted by the abyssal sun wheel for several months, but it wasn't as if Luo Nan hadn't gained anything at all. He learned these little tricks without having to learn them. Soon, a series of groans came from the darkness. The floating malice was like a mosquito that had been sprayed with medicine. It hummed and scattered in all directions. After that, the surroundings became completely quiet. Those who were able to stand guard outside the vagrant exchange knew how to behave, even if they were gangsters. With so many aptitude users entering and exiting, even if there was only 1% or 1,000th chance of conflict, it would be enough to beat this group of people into submission like dogs. Luo Nan was able to easily arrive at the pier that led to the U-Hole market. The main entrance. The entrance that connected the mortal world, the inner world, and the underground black market was placed in this not-so-remote location. There would certainly be some concealment. What appeared on the outside was a sealed-off factory area. It was currently in a state of desolation. Luo Nan didn't know what it used to be. It looked like it was riddled with holes, and even the main entrance was covered in rust. In fact, it was sealed quite tightly. It was hard to get a full view of it from the densely packed high-rise buildings in the surroundings. Luo Nan followed the instructions on the app and found the verification switch on the dirty main entrance. He entered the verification code, but the main entrance didn't move. Instead, a small door to the side opened. After entering the factory area, there was a wide two-way 6-lane road in front of Luo Nan. It led directly to the pier. The markings on the road had long since been ground down, but the road was still smooth as a whole. It was probably a remnant of the factory's early days. Behind the main entrance were a dozen or so old electric scooters. They could be considered a means of transportation. There was quite a bit of distance between the main entrance of the factory area and the pier. Luo Nan didn't pay attention to them. He sized up the place with a few glances. He saw an armed robot guard that had just entered standby mode in the guard room to the side of the main entrance. Opposite the guard room was a disguise room. Well, even though the shop was quite cold and cheerless, the service was quite meticulous. Disguises and modifications were a must if Luo Nan wanted to achieve a perfect crime. Right now Luo Nan's face was smeared with Red Fox's secret color-changing ointment. He appeared quite a bit older than his actual age, but it was just a simple disguise. It was hard for others to notice any flaws in his movements that were as fast as thunder. There were certainly not enough people in a place like this where there were too many eyes. Luo Nan didn't hesitate. He directly entered the disguise room. The door guard room was just the entrance. The true disguise room was deep underground. It could be considered a completely different world. There were many dressing rooms arranged inside the disguise room. It looked like it could accommodate a dozen or 20 people changing their appearances at the same time. This didn't seem like a black market. It seemed more like the backstage of a small theater. Luonan was half fumbling and half looking for fun. He followed the guidance of the AI housekeeper in the disguise room and picked a dressing room to enter. He touched here and looked there. He looked at the hundreds of different disguise techniques. Many of them were fully operated by AI. They didn't require any human intervention. It could be considered an eye-opener. However, Luonan didn't play any fancy tricks according to Cat Eye's instructions. He just chose the simplest and crudest method of wearing a mask and a cloak. He spent more of his energy on another set of equipment. Aside from changing his appearance, the dressing room also had a credit exchange facility. Traders who came to the black market could exchange credit points from the secular world and honor points from the inner world for black market currency. It was said to be quite safe, but Cat Eyes didn't recommend it. This was because the exchange facility had an excellent credit system attached to it. These were Cat Eye's words. Luonan held on to his curiosity and abandoned the currency exchange function of the system interface. He chose the credit rating to the side. According to Cat Eyes, one could obtain a credit loan through this credit rating. To be more precise, it was a free startup fund for professionals. The system required the trader to display their professional skills and use their ability level to exchange for a certain amount of money. This money was purely a gift. It was anonymous and didn't need to be repaid. There were no traces to speak of. Praise the Bo Lu who was willing to burn money. The system interface began to display basic options: fleshly side, mental side. Of course Luonan chose the fleshly side. He had to disguise himself. The system clearly didn't possess the ability to distinguish between lies and lies. It easily let him pass. Next, it asked about professional skills. Luonan chose the mechanical design, processing, and assembly column from the long list. He had learned the basics of engineering from Wuxia over the past half a year. He had also learned how to assemble, modify, and operate the exoskeleton platform. He also had the support of the virtual brain system. This was indeed the skill he could bring out the most in the secular world. According to Wuxia's evaluation, being an engineer in their maintenance center was more than enough. The system seemed to place a bit more emphasis on professional skills. A new window immediately popped up after Luonan made his choice. The new window was actually a virtual work area. It displayed a perspective view of an oil pressure servo system that had been damaged by an external impact. There was even a set of virtual tools lined up next to it. What Luonan needed to do was to eliminate the malfunction, repair the damage, and let the servo system operate once again under a limited set of tools and time. You still use oil pressure? Such an ancient design? Luonan should rejoice. Wuxia's teaching style was more traditional, and his foundation was quite solid. He could still solve this problem. He picked a suitable option on the toolbar, and was about to start when he suddenly realized something. Wait a minute. Didn't I just want to buy an off-road motorcycle? Why is it that long-distance running, disguise, and problem-solving are getting more and more complicated? He rubbed his head, only to touch the cloak he had just put on. This made Luonan chuckle. Who cares? He had nothing to do anyway. Instead of going back to sleep early, wouldn't it be better to go to the legendary black market and broaden his horizons? He tossed aside his distracting thoughts and concentrated on solving the problem. He quickly solved it. But after this checkpoint, what followed was no laughing matter. A series of professional questions popped up in the virtual work area for a period of time. They covered design, maintenance, processing, assembly, and many other aspects. Some were difficult and some were easy. Luonan was able to answer some of them with ease. Some of them required him to rack his brain and sweat. Some of them were simply skipped. Just this question bank alone was an extraordinary accumulation of knowledge, not to mention anything else. In particular, there were practically no theoretical questions within. All of them were concrete and detailed examples that were used. The imperial exam required practical experience. In comparison, the knowledge that worker Zhai imparted was a bit more academic. Fortunately, they had been together for the past few months. They had dismantled various exoskeleton platforms. They had accumulated a large amount of experience. Luonan had set up a forward operating base from scratch in the desolate wilderness. He had encountered and solved many problems, so he wasn't blindly scratching his head. Even so, there were some problems that Luonan had to refer to the structure of the virtual brain system in order to pass the test. Luonan was truly drenched in cold sweat after this round of testing. He hadn't been this nervous even when he faced 2 teams of Deep Blue Squad at the Energy Center. But this also allowed him to have a more detailed understanding of the flaws in his own knowledge structure. His overall train of thought was clear. When he faced the interface that indicated that the evaluation was complete, he simply wanted to return to the starting interface and refresh again. The current Luonan had a whole new level of respect for the Vagrant Exchange. Think about it. It was just mechanical design and processing, yet there was such a rich question bank. There were dozens of categories of various sizes. Wouldn't the scale be even more terrifying when all of them were added together? Luonan really wanted to make a copy and bring it back. The disguise and credit evaluation had been completed while Luonan was sighing with emotion. Luonan looked into the mirror. Inside was a cloaked and masked man. He could tell with a single glance that the man had disguised himself. It was a crude arrangement that said, "I just don't want you to know who I am." The concealment function became more and more effective. Chapter 710. Luonan didn't really care about the effects of his disguise right now. His attention was completely drawn away by the professional credit assessment exam. The credit rating system didn't immediately give a result. It just opened a private passage in the dressing room for Luonan, indicating that he could leave. At the other end of the passage was an old workshop. The production line inside had already been dismantled. Luonan was familiar with the place right now. They were all common testing equipment from the martial arts gym. This was the place to show off his extraordinary power. But Luonan's mind was filled with the professional exam results. He didn't have the mood to show off. He just tested his explosive power and displayed a standard that clearly exceeded the limits of ordinary people. This time, the credit system finally responded. The terminal at the entrance of the old workshop displayed, "The credit rating has been completed. Do you want to create a virtual ID?" There were 2 options. Yes and no. The options were simple, but a large section of explanation popped up when Luonan clicked on it. He knew that the problem inside was not simple at all. Choosing yes meant that he had to create a virtual identity on the Vagrant Exchange's intranet. Although it had nothing to do with his true identity, it would still leave a trace. He needed to have a certain amount of trust in the Vagrant Exchange's intranet. Trust my ass. The reason why he stayed up until midnight was because he didn't want to leave any traces in Spring City. Luonan was about to choose no, but wait. If he chose no, he would be completely anonymous. The system would give the exchange an anonymous card for transactions. This was a primitive method to erase the traces brought by information technology, but this would lead to a lower credit rating. His startup capital would be reduced to 5%, and he wouldn't be able to enjoy the in-depth services and benefits of the Vagrant Exchange. After leaving the exchange, he would have to start all over again. In other words, if he still chose the credit rating, he would have to go through all the evaluations again. Luonan slapped his terminal. Trap. It was definitely a trap. He was not annoyed by the 5%. After all, according to the rules, if he chose to be completely anonymous, he could theoretically obtain this startup capital repeatedly. Compared to the one-time overdraft of creating a virtual identity, the former had more restrictions than the latter. Otherwise, no matter how rich the investor was, he would have to be prepared to spend a lot of money after a dozen or so times. Compared to the startup capital restriction, Luonan was really annoyed by the order of the interface. If this option was placed at the forefront of the credit system interface, then Luo Nan and the vast majority of people who needed to conceal their identities would absolutely choose to remain anonymous without the slightest hesitation. They wouldn't care about the services and benefits. However, after the intense and exciting exam, just a little bit of anticipation would be greatly discounted. Later on, they would have to abandon their exam results and start all over again. Alright, he was a little reluctant. Luo Nan threw a tantrum at the terminal, but in the end he was unable to restrain his anticipation towards the real results. He grimaced in pain as he chose yes. His eyes were wide open as he jumped into the trap, but at the same time he swore to himself, "If my identity is exposed because of this, I will sweep this place clean." The terminal bore Luo Nan's small emotions, but it still maintained its calm. The next interface popped up according to the prescribed order. "Please set up a virtual identity ID." Luo Nan thought for a bit and chose the 2 words smelting furnace. This could be considered a summary of today's operation. Soon, he took out a simple and unadorned metal plate from the designated toolbox. This was his identity nameplate in the U-Hole market. The nameplate had a built-in chip. It could be read and operated on the terminal of the exchange. This money was bound to the virtual identity account. Not only could it be used in the local market, it could be used in the vast majority of vagrant markets around the world. However, this was tantamount to completely entering the credit system of the vagrant exchange. That virtual identity possessed more practical significance. There was always a feeling of giving up halfway. Luo Nan curled his lips and forcefully swallowed the fruit of his emotions. He focused his attention on the evaluation results. The terminal read the nameplate's information and displayed it on the display. Smelting furnace. Fleshly awakened. Intermediate mechanic. Startup capital of 328 points. 328 points? Was this considered a lot or a little? Just as this thought flashed through Luo Nan's mind, the display screen refreshed once more. Professional technical evaluation. 3609 in the mechanical category, top 40%. Overall evaluation. 60,763, top 50%. Startup capital is C file. Note: if you enter the top 500 in the professional evaluation, or the top 5,000 in the overall evaluation, you can change your file to B file. The corresponding startup capital will be refunded. Oh my, there was still a follow-up. Luo Nan blinked his eyes at the display screen. On one hand, he wanted to understand the total scale of the vagrant exchange system, and his own position among the professionals. On the other hand, he wanted to gain a deeper understanding of the Burn Money Scout and its tricks. Right now, it seemed that the startup capital itself was quite reliable. This wasn't a one-time deal. There were still upgrades to come. Of course, this was also a method to increase user stickiness. Luo Nan began to comfort himself. Fortunately, he chose to establish a virtual identity. Otherwise, if he followed the standard of 5%, he would be left with less than 20 points. What would he do with it? Buy a midnight snack? It was almost 1 o'clock in the middle of the night. There were very few people who would mess around at this hour in the black market. There was not a second person who entered the entire time. Luo Nan completed his mental adjustment. He stepped on his electric scooter in a carefree and unhurried manner. He rolled over the spacious asphalt road and passed through the spacious and empty factory area. He arrived at the pier a minute later. This place was still empty. There was only a terminal that could be used to swipe a card for verification. Luo Nan operated according to the rules. A sealed small boat floated up from the water's surface a few seconds later. It immediately opened up its cladding, revealing a narrow cabin that could accommodate 2 people at most. The automatic control system display screen at the bow of the boat lit up, displaying the winding route of travel. This was the transportation tool that led to the U-Hole market. Luo Nan boarded the small boat. The small boat started automatically the moment he sat down. It noiselessly tore through the water's surface and moved forward at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Luo Nan sized up the place with curiosity on the way. Sparse and scattered lighting seeped through the gaps between the densely packed stalagmites above his head. It was hazy and carried chaotic ghostly shadows. Luonan could still faintly see the mottled colors on the rocks. The U-hole market was located in the depths of a typical karst cave. The entire structure was divided into sections. There was a clear downward path after traveling several kilometers along the waterway. The buildings in the city grew more and more sparse, and the topography became more and more complex. A portion of the waterway even needed to be submerged in order to pass through. It was because of this that the small boat had a completely sealed cladding. It also needed to be used as a temporary submarine. The karst cave in front of him grew lower and lower. The falling stalagmites were about to hit his head. Luonan simply lay down. His gaze lingered on the stalagmites of all shapes and colors. The sensory network that came out ahead had already mapped the general situation of the area within a radius of 20 kilometers in his mind. There were hundreds of karst caves of all sizes. There were hundreds of thousands of stalagmites. The result of the direct reflection was very chaotic. It was like an enormous maze. Luonan closed his eyes for a moment. His cerebral cortex and central nervous system operated at high speeds, endlessly integrating the information received by the sensory network. He used the secret technique of overall planning to increase the efficiency of the processing, gradually stripping away the outer layer of the chaotic and useless baggage to form an even clearer road map. Well, it was still relatively simple. Luonan had been carrying out the reconstruction of the structure of his mental senses for the past few months. The source of power came from the depths of the cloud world, the misty labyrinth that made it difficult for him to move forward. The space-time configuration fragments danced before his eyes all the time like a sandstorm. They were randomly pieced together and combined together. There were even more repulsion and collisions. When faced with the tens of billions of configuration fragments, Luonan was unable to grasp the logic of the structure within. He was unable to figure out what kind of laws were there. His soul strength was without a basis. Most mental senses and interference were ineffective. Exploring the mysteries of the depths of the labyrinth was out of the question. Over there, Luonan had become blind with his eyes wide open. He could only toss and turn in an area with a radius of a few dozen meters. He slowly piled them up like building blocks, expanding the range. If it weren't for Ruei-1, this little walking stick, 100 or 1,000 Luonans would have been lost until the end of their lives. Compared to the misty labyrinth in the clouds, the underground karst cave was far too intimate. Luonan only used 10 seconds to draw a concise and clear topographic map in his mind. Whether it was the winding waterway, or the isolated and fractured topographic structure, everything was clearly reflected on the map. Next up was a matter of supplementing the details. Speaking of which, if he were to make a rubbing copy of this topographic map and sell it, how much money would it fetch? If he wasn't satisfied, would he want a similar high-definition version of the world map? Luonan still didn't have a trusting attitude towards the 328 points of starting capital. His mind revolved with business. The AI within the small boat emitted a warning sound while he was pondering. It warned the passengers that they were about to enter the water. The stalactites above their heads had already fallen down piece by piece. Some of the edges had already pierced into the water surface. The small boat's fully enclosed cladding slid and docked, sealing the already narrow cabin even more tightly. They entered the underwater phase. The lights within the cabin lit up, and the oxygen supply system began to operate. Overall, it didn't seem stuffy. Luonan blinked and looked at the half-worn paint on the cladding. He thought, next time I come here, I must definitely try the entrance outside the city. That place is much more spacious and convenient. However, it was quite interesting to carry out underwater in this manner. He looked at the waterway topographic map that he had sorted out earlier. It seemed that this was the only way to run through the 4 levels of the U-hole market. There were over 20 large and small black market areas. Luonan pulled up the trade app and looked at the relevant explanation. Sure enough, the U-hole market was ranked at the top of the hundreds of vagrant exchanges in the world. There was a bit of an adventurous flavor to it. Unfortunately, he was the type that had a map-wide hack. Luonan burst out in laughter. The sound of laughter hadn't died away when the small boat suddenly shook. It seemed to have collided with something. A muffled vibration came in and the boat's entire body drifted to the side. Then it collided with the uneven stone wall on the side of the river. This time it was clearly heavier and Luo Nan felt dizzy and disoriented from the jolt. Chapter 7:11. Luo Nan instinctively panicked upon encountering an accident, but he soon calmed down. Basically, the most difficult way for him to die was to be electrocuted to death. The other was to drown to death. Of course, the most miserable way for him to die was to be electrocuted to death or drown to death. In any case, his mental senses were already focused, and he immediately confirmed that the small boat had encountered a car accident. No, it was a boat accident. The small boat had collided with a stalagmite that had sunk to the bottom of the water. As for why it collided, it was because the stalagmite that had sunk to the bottom of the water had suddenly bounced up when the small boat passed by. The top of the stalagmite had risen, and the small boat's navigation system had made a mistake in its judgment. The small boat was unable to dodge in time. Looking into the cause of the accident, the relatively gentle waterway did not have any strong turbulence in the water. The stalagmite had moved on its own. Could it be that the distortion of the wilderness had caused the stalagmite to become a spirit? Then Luo Nan saw that the front end of the stalagmite and the small boat had already cracked open for some unknown reason. Large amounts of water poured in, and there were flickering electric flames jumping inside. However, the flames were soon extinguished. Luo Nan's mental senses were limited by the precision of his senses. Without the support of special techniques, it was not enough to naturally penetrate the completely sealed opaque barrier. But it was different if a hole was opened. Oh my, this is truly a pleasant surprise. Luo Nan reached out and slapped the cover. Since the outside of the small boat was still underwater, the cover adhered to its own mission under the control of the system. It firmly sealed itself. This was not a problem for Luo Nan. The external neuron poked at the system, and the cover ignored the surging river water and opened on its own. Luo Nan shivered from the shock of the ice-cold river water. However, not a single drop of water seeped in, aside from the transmission of the chill. This was because he had utilized the condensation ring to fully control the water molecules, forming a thin and tough water membrane to protect the effects of his disguise. And so Luo Nan followed the surging flow of water out of the small boat's cabin. The small boat had already moved forward a few dozen meters crookedly with the flow of water. He still needed to turn back. He hadn't deliberately practiced swimming, but the sensor network built on the foundation of the condensation ring made him very sensitive to the details of the flow of water. Coupled with his outstanding body coordination, he found the feeling after just a few strokes in the water. The water was turbid and dark, but it was as easy as reading lines on his palm. Soon he came to the side of the damaged stalagmite that was jumping. He gave it a push without any hope at all. Sure enough, even if the inside was hollow, the weight was quite heavy. At the very least, Luo Nan had no way of dragging it away. Luo Nan looked at the glimmer of light that still flickered within the fissure. He said to himself, "It's up to your luck." His soul strength interfered with the external neuron, forming an interference wave that swept across the control system within the stalagmite. A second later, a crack appeared in the middle of the stalagmite. The water that was supposed to rush in was strangely turned back and churned, as if there was an invisible wall that could not be penetrated. It was under these circumstances that the door on the stalagmite was able to break free from the heavy water pressure for a short period of time. It opened normally, and Luo Nan saw the transparent environment inside. He didn't go in. The door was far too small. Even his immature body of a youth would find it hard to squeeze in. With a slight thought, the water that had been blocked outside the door swirled and surged in. It was like an iron wok in the hands of a chef. It performed a unique skill similar to a flipping ladle. It dipped inside the stalagmite, and when it surged out again, it carried a small human body with it. The human body moved at an appropriate angle, avoiding the damage that might come from the door's collision. Perfect. It was just as Luo Nan's mental senses had predicted. This was a child that was at most 5 or 6 years old. He was about the same age as the little bastard from Worker Zhai's family. The child's face was already warped with panic and fear due to the series of unforeseen events. But even so, he still opened his eyes wide. doing his best to distinguish the surrounding environment after the series of unforeseen events. He was very different from his peers who closed their eyes and cried for their mothers. Let's go. Luo Nan grabbed the child by the back of his collar and turned around to chase after the small boat that had been washed several hundred meters away by the current. Then he saw the target that had sunk to the bottom of the river full of water, unable to rise again. This really was a sad story. Luo Nan shook his head and turned to look at the little fellow in his hand. Then he saw the pair of eyes that were doing their best to open wide. The premise for the little fellow to be able to do this was that Luo Nan had already used the condensation ring to filter the water, creating a breathing, aerobic environment. Perhaps the little fellow already felt that there was no need to worry about his survival, but he did his best to look over. His panic and fear began to settle, and his brows were still furrowed. He really did look like a precocious boy. If this wasn't the case, it would have been impossible for him to drive a small submarine disguised as a stalagmite through the waterway. In addition, this child's body. Tonight was truly an eventful night. At this time, Luo Nan naturally forgot that he was the one who started everything. He was the legendary instigator of all this. Luo Nan walked forward in the waterway for nearly a kilometer before he finally left this section of the underground waterway. Then he found a relatively flat riverbank and climbed up while carrying the little fellow. Illumination appeared once more here, reflecting the blurry outlines of the surrounding karst cave. The U-Hole market paid more attention to the construction of basic facilities, but no matter how much attention they paid, they couldn't withstand the appearance of accidents. I'll compensate you. Luo Nan still hadn't thought of how to communicate with the precocious boy in his hand, but the boy took the initiative to express his attitude. Other than his voice being a bit shaky, everything else was quite good. After all, he was soaked in water. He wasn't like Luo Nan. His entire body was dry. It was as if he had swum in a fake waterway. Luo Nan blurted out a sentence. That small boat isn't mine anyways. Crap. He forgot to change his voice. Also, the moves he made earlier seemed to be all on the mental side. Right when Luo Nan suddenly woke up and was vexed, the precocious boy went, "Oh." Then he actually didn't say anything else. Luo Nan turned his head to look curiously. He saw the little boy turn his head to size up the surroundings. Then he raised his right arm to look at the projected virtual screen. A detailed map of the karst cave's waterway was displayed on the screen. Fine. His plan to sell the map could be scrapped. Luo Nan sighed soundlessly. He deliberately suppressed his voice and said, "Do you know how to get there?" The little boy raised his head to glance at him. Cave 47 is surrounded by water. Oh. Luo Nan finally understood when he saw the gaze the little boy cast over. So it turns out I'm the one doing it. It was rare for him to meet someone younger than him. Luo Nan wanted to tease the little boy a bit. He imitated the tone of a cold-blooded killer in the movies. In this era, labor costs are the most expensive. Luo Nan's gaze shot towards the little boy's right hand as he spoke. The temperature in Spring City at the end of April wasn't low. The little boy wore a small cashmere glove on his hand. The sleeve of the glove covered his entire right arm tightly. The little fellow was very sensitive. He lowered his raised right arm. Luo Nan felt that he was being a bit rude, so he stopped teasing the little boy. Forget it. Let's go. Even if you're being kind, you need to finish what you started. He didn't ask the little boy about the map anymore. Even though he didn't know what Cave 47 and Cave 57 were, he had an entire set of water maps of the karst cave terrain in his mind. He was very clear that he just needed to head east and cross a secret underwater passage to enter the cave market. There was a small trading market at the edge of the cave market. It was naturally convenient to go there. He grabbed the little fellow's collar out of habit and prepared to head east. Who knew that the little fellow would struggle? Go that way. The little boy used his left hand to point in the direction they came from. Go back. There's still a long way to go to the market. The return trip is even shorter. Are you bullying me for not having a map? Luo Nan was amused. He thought about the cause and effect of encountering this little boy and a guess blurted out. Kid, you didn't run away from home, did you? I didn't. The little boy firmly refuted. His round eyes didn't even blink. He had a clear conscience. Ehe. Luo Nan was just about to expose his lie when his sensory network captured a change in the river. He simply crossed his arms and didn't move. Then let's wait a bit longer. I have a premonition that the adults of your family will come looking for us soon. The little boy's eyes suddenly flashed. He clearly became nervous. His body still wanted to shrink back, but Luo Nan reached out and grabbed him by the collar. Luo Nan calmly sized up the little boy a few more times after locking him in place. He coughed twice, cleared his throat, and suddenly increased his volume. He shouted with abundant energy, "Hello! Is there anyone here? Help! There's someone trapped here. There's a child among them." The little boy was stupefied the instant Luo Nan shouted. He soon began to struggle violently. But how could he compete with Luo Nan, who already had considerable accomplishments in the fleshly body? Extending his arms and kicking his legs, twisting his waist and shaking his shoulders were of no use. In the end, the little boy couldn't take it anymore. He let loose a torrent of curses. "You idiot! Do you want to die?" Kids these days really weren't cute. Luo Nan touched the hood of the cloak that covered his face. He turned to look at the little boy's flushed face, and the fact that he couldn't continue after spitting out the profanity. He couldn't vent his anger and panic, but he didn't get angry from being offended. This showed that Luo Nan had a good personality. Forget it. Luo Nan didn't deny that the little boy and the people on the small boat sailing over from the distant waterway had their emotions suddenly fluctuate after hearing Luo Nan's shout. The color and structure of their emotions had more or less made Luo Nan pay attention to them. However, it was too late to say anything now. The waterway was soon illuminated by bright spotlights. The strong light pushed the shadows of the stalagmites in the water, rocking this isolated karst cave. Far away in the waterway, two small boats that were exactly the same as the ones sunk to the bottom of the waterway. They sailed over from the waterway one after the other. Yep, there was a third one underwater. The small boat was still some distance away from this place, but someone was already shouting on the boat. "Polio, is that you?" No one answered. The person on the boat continued to shout loudly, "Friend over there. Look after the child. We're almost there." "You're quite polite." Luo Nan faced the little boy with a smile, still grabbing him by the collar. He really did look after the boy. The little boy glared fiercely at Luo Nan and cursed with a hoarse voice. "You idiot. This cloak and hat is really quite stupid. Oh right, you're called Polio. What's your nickname? Idiot." Chapter 7:12. Two small boats approached on the surface of the water. There were a total of 3 people on the boats. The muscular man in the lead didn't wait for the boats to reach the shore. He jumped ashore first. Under the dim light, his skin was dark, his face was full of stubble, and his eyes were shining. This was especially true when he saw Luo Nan carrying the little boy Polio. "Polio, are you okay?" The bearded man expressed his deep concern. Luo Nan deduced from Polio's previous reaction that Polio would spit at him, or at the very least, struggle more fiercely. However, when the bearded man came ashore, the little fellow just hung his head and didn't say a word. Then, the bearded man sized up Luo Nan. He was a bit stunned when he saw Luo Nan's attire. Of course, cloaked men like this were not rare in the Yuhol market. After all, this was the vagrant exchange. Aside from the local authority dogs, there were also some vagrant criminals wanted by the Star Alliance Committee. The most important reason was that there were too many people coming here. They specialized in tricking people. It was best to be able to cover their faces. The bearded man immediately reacted. He grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. He gave Luo Nan a cupped fist salute that was rarely seen in the outside world, but was quite common here. This was to avoid the awkwardness of shaking hands with people like the cloaked man. "Friend, many thanks. This child Polio has been tormenting us quite a bit. Friend, you. My boat sank to the bottom of the water over there. It collided with the little fellow's submarine." "Really? Then I'm really sorry." Clearly, the bearded man knew how Polio had run away from home. His smile was a bit awkward. The little boy still didn't raise his head. He just greeted coldly, "Uncle Luan." The bearded man laughed bitterly. Polio, it's rare for your mom to go out. She entrusted you to me. And your Aunt Fun. Now that your Aunt Fun is sick, you can't be tormenting her. Polio said coldly. I'm not tormenting her. There's just a problem with the experiment. The bearded man smiled bitterly at Luo Nan. He had the feeling of helplessness and love from an elder. He seemed to be seeking Luo Nan's approval. But Luo Nan's expression couldn't be conveyed under the double cover of the cloak and mask. Well, no matter how stubborn Polio was, the adults of his family had come looking for him. He had to return. Luo Nan, this customer of the exchange who disregarded past enmity and acted bravely for a just cause, obviously needed to be well received. Both sides exchanged names. Luo Nan naturally referred to himself as a smelting furnace. No one here would care. The 2 small boats on the surface carried them back. As there were only 2 seats on each boat, Zhang Luan smiled and said, I'll squeeze with Polio. Brother Furnace, you take that boat. This was a very normal arrangement, but Luo Nan chuckled. Polio and I are the smallest here. It's most convenient for us to be together. Am I right, Polio? The boy looked up for the first time, and only saw the silly hat blocking his line of sight. Half a second later, he nodded slightly as a tacit agreement. Zhang Luan was taken aback for a moment. Then he smiled and said, All right, I won't squeeze with you guys over here. X, Y, and Z, take care of the guests. Another small boat sailed over and invited Luo Nan and Polio to board. Standing on the boat was a tall and thin young man. His eyes weren't big, and when he smiled, they became slits. When he saw Polio, he sighed and said, My little ancestor. Polio didn't pay attention to him at all. The 2 small boats set off. In the beginning, the young man, X, Y, and Z, tried to communicate with Luo Nan and Polio, but the 2 of them remained silent to the end. They didn't communicate with each other, and the atmosphere soon sank. On the other small boat, Zhang Lu, and spoke a few words from afar at first, but then he became silent when he saw the situation. Only the faint noise of the small boat's motors could be heard along the way. The atmosphere was quite unbearable for the rest of the journey. As for the small boat that followed them underwater, it didn't follow them back. Instead, it continued to move forward to the waters where the incident happened. It found Luo Nan's overturned vehicle and the submarine disguised as a stalagmite. It circled back and forth a few times, studying them. Luo Nan didn't care too much. He just switched back and forth a few layers of the sensor network. He looked silent, but he wasn't idle at all. He didn't care if other people were having a hard time or not. They traveled along the winding waterway for another 7 or 8 kilometers before the core area of the U-Hole market was finally in sight. Luo Nan extended his head and looked at the chaotic and flickering area. His finger, which had been on Polio's collar, moved inwards and pinched him. You said it. You're letting me stay at your house tonight. Polio raised his head in surprise, but he was pressed down by Luo Nan. He could only let out a muffled groan as though he was admitting it with its Sundra attitude. On the other side, Zhang Luan smiled. It's not like we can't even find a place to rest here, Brother Smelter. It's nothing. We can learn from each other if we stay together. This kid built a malfunctioning stone shell. His nostrils are all the way to the top of his skull. If I don't show him my high standards, he'll think that the well is the sky. Zhang Luan asked, Brother, are you proficient in mechanical design? At least I'm a little better than most people. Luo Nan made up a lie. He turned to Polio and said, We're professionals. Don't forget to ask your mother to give me a discount when we go shopping. The small boat was docked at the dock. Luo Nan grabbed Polio and jumped ashore. Then he chose 2 electric hover bikes and gave one to Polio. He stretched and said, After a long day, I need a good sleep. After a long day, I definitely need to have a good sleep. Only your place is secluded and there are not many people around. Besides Polio, Zhang Luan, X, Y, and Z, and the others looked at each other in bewilderment. Frequent customer? Why didn't they see it earlier? Zhang Luan and the others could no longer say anything to this cloaked man who was speaking incoherently. Their hearts were filled with bewilderment. X, Y, and Z pretended to have a slip of the tongue and asked, Brother Furnace, did you come to our U-Hole before? Oh, sorry. Luonan was natural and unrestrained as he said. He came here a few times, but it was anonymous. Xinz wanted to ask what was the relationship between Luonan and Polio. But Luonan had already led Polio forward on the hoverbike. He didn't show any signs of hesitation. Polio's mother's shop in the U-Hole market was quite large. It occupied a small karst cave that had been modified. It was located in a remote area, and it took some time to get there. However, Luonan led the way the entire time. The journey was smooth, and they didn't take any detours. Zhang Luan and the others were even more confused. They didn't say anything when they reached the shop. They left in a hurry with their heads full of doubts. After they left, Polio stared with wide eyes and asked, "Were you sent by my mother?" "Sorry, you're thinking too much." Luonan dispelled the boy's extravagant hopes. He didn't care about Polio's gloomy expression. He sized up the layout of the shop with interest. Just as he had observed through the sensor network, this shop was a repair center that sold mechanical parts. The layout of the shop was quite good, if he ignored the obvious signs of destruction. Luonan had long since set his eyes on the hand-assembled, wild-looking heavy-duty SUV behind the display window. He felt that this was simply the arrangement of the heavens. "This car is mine. I'll help you solve your problem. Give this car to me." Polio was indeed a precocious boy, but he couldn't find any logic in his small brain when facing a character like Luonan, who defied common sense. He subconsciously raised his right arm to make a gesture of strength, but his expression suddenly changed when he raised his right arm halfway. His entire arm froze in midair. It swayed up and down, but it no longer obeyed his orders. Luonan looked over. Polio's face was swollen red. He turned around and ran madly toward the second floor of the shop. But no matter how intense his movements were, his right arm maintained a stiff posture. It was hard to move. Luonan didn't follow. He stood in place and frowned. 2 minutes later, there was a bang from upstairs. Something crashed down and rolled on the ground, making an ear-piercing noise. What followed was a series of smaller crashes, one after another. Luonan hesitated for a moment, but he still walked upstairs. Polio was half kneeling on the ground in a room on the second floor. There was an empty box in front of him, and there were other parts and sundries on the ground. They were undoubtedly the source of the previous noise. Polio's right arm maintained a stiff posture. His movable left hand pounded the floor again, and again without holding back. He was gritting his teeth. His eyes were red and tears were swirling, but he didn't let them fall. Luonan couldn't help but be moved by the intense emotions of a 5- or 6-year-old child, who was controlling them in a self-mutilating manner. Polio finally noticed Luonan at the door. He subconsciously wanted to retract his arm, but he completely lost the ability to control it. He could only let it lie rigidly by his side. He didn't let down the sleeve that he had just rolled up, revealing a large portion of the skeleton with a metallic luster. Polio's red eyes met Luonan's hidden eyes behind the mask. He subconsciously wanted to dodge, but he quickly restrained his impulse and roared back with an even more unyielding attitude. "What are you looking at? Have you never seen a prosthetic before?" Luonan didn't speak, and he didn't deliberately avoid anything. Polio saw that he couldn't move Luonan, so he didn't waste any more energy. He bit his lips and used his left hand to tidy up the sundries on the floor. "It's out of battery, and the backup battery. I lost it. It's not a big deal, I just need to charge it." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a click from somewhere. Immediately after, the lights above his head began to flicker, and the relay protectors began to take effect. The problem was that in less than a second, true darkness rapidly expanded, filling the room, the storefront, and even the surrounding area. Polio was stunned on the spot. He allowed the darkness to swallow him. Only the sound of his intermittent breathing could be heard in the room. Polio's left hand pressed against the sharp edges of the sundries on the floor, allowing the real pain to be transmitted to his brain. It was a stark contrast to his heavy right arm. He forcefully bit his lower lip and controlled his breathing. He didn't want to lose face in front of that mysterious fool. But this darkness was pitch black and didn't allow light to pass through. It was like a thick blanket draped over his body. It was a little warm, like a mother's blanket. It wasn't shameful to cover Dowdu with a blanket. The hot little Daodu finally rolled down from his eye sockets, and streaks of tears were drawn on his face. Polio didn't forget to maintain his manly dignity. He spoke forcefully so that the fool could hear him clearly. If possible, he wanted to let those unscrupulous creatures hear him. Chapter 7:13. Who cut off the electricity like it was on fire? About a few hundred meters away from Polio's shop, Zhang Luan's footsteps were so quick that he almost kicked the door open. He growled at the group of people in the hall. There were 7 or 8 people sitting or standing in the hall, and they all looked over in shock. Zhang Luan's face was rough, but he was very scheming. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a wife by his side and still be able to plan today's events. However, the ups and downs of the situation tonight, and the successive changes put him under great pressure. It also caused him to have a belly full of evil fire, which immediately exploded when he was stimulated. Brother and someone came up and tried to explain, but Zhang Luan thought he was the culprit. He glared at him and pushed him in the chest. Are you an idiot? You can't even understand the gravity of the situation. That furnace isn't easy to get along with. Have you ever seen a guy who can roll around in the waterway without a single drop of water on him? Either he's lying, or he has special abilities. He clearly knows that the U-hole is deep, but he still barged in. Do you think people like that can be provoked so easily? The person who tried to explain looked aggrieved. Brethren, it was Mr. Wright who ordered it. Mr. Wright? Zhang Luan's temper was blocked, but he quickly gritted his teeth and said, even if it was Mr. Wright. Even if it was me, so what? A cold voice interrupted him. A door at the back of the hall opened, and a tall, middle-aged white man walked out, wiping the blood off his hands with a white gauze. Zhang Luan's pupils shrank. He tried to see through Wright's shoulder and the darkness behind the hall to see the situation in the room. His expression was so obvious that everyone in the hall could roughly see what was going on. The tall white man, Wright, threw the blood-stained gauze into the trash can and said coldly, don't worry, I left you some dignity. I didn't do anything too excessive. But because of this, your wife was able to show her loyalty and toughness, and didn't reveal any valuable information. Zhang Luan's expression was very ugly, even if he and his wife parted ways and became enemies. Asking others to interrogate and torture him was undoubtedly a double denial of his dignity and ability. Disregarding everything else, the subordinates in the hall were obviously following Wright's lead. This was also a very natural thing. After all, Brain Demon, Wright was publicly recognized as one of the bloodiest figures in the wilderness. He was rather powerful and had a great reputation. He was just a middle-ranking member of a small order that had rebelled against him. In fact, didn't Zhang Luan himself only make up his mind to rebel after seeing Wright? After thinking for a while, Zhang Luan's anger was almost gone. He could only fight for some face for himself. Mr. Wright, we haven't found any traces of the church's holy relic yet. That bastard is a very important bargaining chip. Now that a cloaked man suddenly jumped out, it's really not suitable to take drastic measures before we figure out his identity and stance. It was already bad enough when we searched the store. If we aggravate the situation and cause a conflict, we won't be able to get any more clues from Wu Jun. Mr. Zhang, I think you have a tendency to exaggerate Wu Jun's and your husband's willpower. Wright's grayish-blue eyes stared straight at him. You have to understand that a person's willpower is just an illusory bubble in front of instinct. People can keep secrets only because the willpower bubble hasn't been burst, or because they've made some cunning coding programs for their thoughts. These methods are not a problem for us. Zhang Luan opened his mouth to say something, but he was interrupted by Li's hand. The reason I agreed to your shoddy plan, other than demanding a perfect result, is that Spring City is currently in a very sensitive period. It's not suitable to make any big movements. But didn't you notice that the cloaked man was playing with you from the beginning to the end? At the same time, he forced himself to add drama. He has a strong desire to show off, even if it's a shameful face. This is a happy offender, a typical troublemaker. With him around, your arrangements against that little bastard are meaningless. Happy offender? You're the A-level felon wanted by the Star Alliance Committee, okay? What do you mean by demanding perfect results? Isn't it because you're the one who can't see the light of day? Zhang Luan tried to remind him. But if we provoke him like this, won't we make a bigger move? Also, we don't know his background. What if he's a super troublesome guy? That depends on luck. Wright smiled. I think you're lucky. If he's a trap left by Wu Jun, and if he's a troublesome strong guy like you said, you'd have been swatted to death like a fly the moment the power went out. Since you're here alive, that person's strength shouldn't be strong enough to break through the situation. For safety's sake, no matter how much stimulation he faces, he'll probably endure it or wait for a chance to escape. Protecting that bastard is the first priority, and we can set up the trap here. If he's not. If he's just a self-righteous idiot who sees injustice, then the reason is right in front of you. He's an outsider who hides his head but shows his tail. And you, Zhang Luan, are the temporary guardian of that little pineapple. If there's a conflict, the Exchange and Spring City will undoubtedly stand on your side. Hey, have you forgotten about the Grade A wanted criminal? It's hard to say for the Ability User Association in Spring City, but the military system is counting on people like you to provide funds. Zhang Lu, and swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. From his nickname, it could be seen that the legendary brain demon was never a good-tempered person. He could only beat around the bush again. But Wu Jun's relationship with the Exchange and the Ability User Association is very good. If we really provoke those people, things will become very complicated. Don't you still have me? The corner of Li's mouth split open. In his dark red mouth, the tip of his tongue that was shaking was as long as a blunt needle. What I want to do is work with my children to shut up those disobedient fellows in time, and prepare a delicious meal at the same time. The interior of Polio's shop was pitch black, but the precocious Polio didn't shed Lil P. He widened his eyes and looked at the energy bar of his multifunctional mechanical arm that was slowly but visibly increasing. At first he thought it was an illusion. After all the power sources in his house were useless. Wires, wireless charging, and other devices were meaningless. However, the charging motion under his eyelids was still progressing steadily. He moved the mechanical arm of his right hand slightly. His bionic fingers flexed and stretched, and the various parts of his body were checked. There were no problems. You can move a bit more. As long as I'm here, it's very easy to charge. Pineapple unconsciously grinned. He found it hard to suppress his excitement. Silly, you're too awesome. All right, I'm really quite silly. I ran a marathon and an hour of tests just to help you charge. What was I thinking? Pineapple was slow for a moment before he finally came to a realization. Sorry, you're called Electric Furnace, right? I understand. You deserve to be tormented by others. After accompanying Pineapple through the initial excitement, the little boy's feelings toward Luo Nan were completely different. However, compared to the emotional changes, the process of accumulating electricity seemed to take a long time. Luo Nan's electromagnetic configuration was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. However, he was still unable to change the physical properties of the power source. He still needed to have the necessary time. The topic naturally extended from the mechanical arm to explore the source and cause and effect. Of course, this was a sensitive topic. In the past, Pineapple would have been unwilling to talk about it. But now his mood was on a roller coaster. He had seen worse situations, so he was more or less desensitized. The continuous injection of electricity washed away the haze in Pineapple's mind. It gave him more courage to talk about everything to his new friend. The little fellow opened the hollow chamber on the upper part of the mechanical arm. Here, this is my arm. In Luo Nan's eyes, Pineapple's right arm, wrist, hand, fingers, and other body structures were all intact. There seemed to be no problems with the deeper bones, joints, muscles, and blood vessels. However, its total length was less than 20 centimeters. Judging from Pineapple's age and height, the length of his arm should be more than half that of a newborn. This was the level of a newborn baby. There was no doubt that this was some sort of developmental deformity. Ever since I was born, this arm has stopped growing. It has been maintained in this state. I have no way of controlling it. It's just an extra section. Faced with this situation, Luonan did not know what to say in order to not agitate Pineapple. He could only maintain his silence. The little boy became calmer as he spoke. Mom told me that with the current level of technology, there would definitely be a way. She brought me to see many doctors and made many plans, but she was never satisfied with them. Last year, Mom asked someone to order this mechanical arm for me. She said that it was temporary. Actually, I feel that other than its endurance, everything else is fine. Pineapple pretended to be magnanimous when faced with Luonan's gaze. With it, I can do many things that other children can't compare to. Although I wasn't the one who designed the stalagmite, I spent more than 2 months to assemble it based on the blueprints alone. Then it ran aground. Luonan regretted it the moment he spoke. Pineapple didn't retort. He just lowered his head and said, "There must be a problem with the shock absorber. I didn't want to cause trouble for Mom. After Aunt Fan sent me a warning signal, I wanted to dive into the water and run away. However, I shouldn't have walked that route. The depth of the water and the width of the water channel are too much for me. It would have been better to hide in the deeper parts of the karst cave." Luonan watched a 5 or 6-year-old child seriously review his assembled underwater mechanical vehicle and the route planning problems. Even though Luonan wasn't considered an adult, he couldn't help but feel a sense of crisis, as if he was about to be slapped to death on the beach. What was I doing when I was 5 years old? I was probably crying because of my spineless dad. Kids these days, Luonan suddenly thought of something when his thoughts reached this point. "Where's your dad?" "Dad. What's that? Is it edible?" Chapter 7:14. Polio was young, and he had been tossed and turned for an entire night. His mood had changed drastically, so he unconsciously lay on the floor and fell asleep halfway through the charge. Even though he was fast asleep, he still half-hugged the cold and hard mechanical arm to his chest, using his body temperature to warm it up. This position was not too comfortable, so the little fellow's brows were constantly furrowed. Occasionally, he would even move his body. Luonan was not sleepy at all. He sat cross-legged in the darkness, watching the little boy beside him. His mind was still filled with the emotional stirrings that arose from this. There were also chaotic and distracting thoughts from his rhythm and plans that had been completely disrupted. The underground karst cave was quite stuffy, especially after the blackout. The equipment had stopped working and ventilation was a problem. Luonan felt very uncomfortable. Luonan grabbed the thick and heavy cloak to give himself a gust of wind. His fingers made contact with his chest as he rose and fell. The sensation was soft with a hint of hardness. His chest swelled up slightly, forming a clear contrast with the surrounding muscles. Luonan was stunned for a moment. He immediately recalled that this was the biochemical reactor. The biochemical reactor had been remolded. After his somatic cells were initialized by the arrangement of tinder within the furnace, they were transformed into fully functional stem cells that proliferated and split. In a certain sense, it was already a part of his body. It was his external organ. There would be no difference even if he took it and sliced it. In comparison, the other artificial muscles that were produced by the biochemical reactor were constructed together with the exoskeleton armor. Their structure was based on Luonan's stem cells, and they were modulated according to the formula. The structural strength was similar, but it was more suitable for electromagnetic configurations. Reality proved that Luonan's physical strength was a bit lacking. At that time, he had used 2 portions of the substrate to create an electromagnetic muscle membrane structure that was far larger than the furnace body. However, when it came to actual combat experiments, he had only created a paradigm before everything was blown to smithereens. Only the biochemical reactor remained. It enjoyed the same safety mechanism as Luonan's main body. The biochemical reactor's various functional areas had already been restored, and its volume had increased by a bit. It was embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen, like a demonic insect that had pierced into his flesh and bones. Luonan used his fingertips to poke and prod at the biochemical reactor. These were all subconscious movements, and he used this opportunity to organize his thoughts. After a moment, he finally had a clear plan, and the inside of the biochemical reactor correspondingly changed. Luonan waited for the corresponding functional areas within the reactor to start operating. He extended his hand and touched Polio's deformed and undeveloped arm with his fingertips. He didn't make any other movements, but a collection tube originating from the biochemical reactor did a slight extension. It collected a bit of Polio's skin tissue and stored it in the storage area. This action was almost exactly the same as what Li Yiwei and Rin Qi had done earlier. However, the two of them were collecting the special secretions of a mutated human. Luonan just wanted to collect a bit of pineapple's cell tissue for an experiment. He was thinking that the biochemical reactor's tissue regeneration technology was exactly what Polio needed. Luonan couldn't be considered a philanthropic person, but since he ran into her, he would obviously help if he could. Unfortunately, after a short period of analysis and experimentation, the virtual brain system gave him a disappointing result. Indeed, the biochemical reactor could rely on the arrangement of the furnace and a special formula to realize the initialization of somatic cells. Through the absorption of energy and nutrients, the cells could undergo rapid fission and multiplication, forming body tissue that was no different from the main body. It could even mutate into a special creation like the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure. However, the premise of all this was the ownership of the biochemical reactor and the control of the tinder. Luonan used his unique soul strength mode and the structural characteristics of his body and soul, which were blended into one after his formal awakening, to serve as the foundation for the biochemical reactor's activation and interdependence. Simply speaking, once bound, this night-level, basic colonization-type biochemical reactor could only be used by Luonan alone. He could also initialize Polio's cell tissue and reconstruct the tissue structure. However, this was a new product that had absorbed the characteristics of Polio's fleshly body. Luonan could use it, but if he transplanted it to Polio, the consequences of rejection, genetic pollution, mutation, and other unpredictable consequences would come one after another. Luonan vowed not to give up until the child was tormented to death. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Luonan reformatted the biochemical reactor, erased all traces of himself, and gifted it to Polio. With Polio's current state and the foundation of his body and soul that lacked the support of extraordinary strength, it was impossible for him to realize ignition and activation. The strong always inadvertently possess something, and vice versa. Luonan spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He temporarily gave up on the idea of borrowing the biotech of an unknown civilization to treat Polio. Let's return to a more realistic level. That fellow with the vicious nickname was sharpening his blade, preparing to turn him into reserve rations. Brain demon. Who's that? Luonan had a good habit of asking his secretary if there was something he couldn't decide on. He once again opened up the closed system network. Now that he had to hide from Sister Yuan, the only person he could consult was Cat Eyes. What brain demon? Cat Eyes answered a few calls before arriving at Gear on the north bank of Acumen College in the middle of the night. She was yawning, wanting to take a nap. She was conserving her energy in preparation to cover for that extremely unreliable boss tomorrow morning. Her favorite place to sleep was naturally the bar counter with alcohol. Therefore, she went to the public activity room on the second floor of the basement. Because she was sleepy and drunk, her brain was a bit sluggish when she heard this unfamiliar name. She paused for a moment before remembering. Brain demon? That moronic fugitive who believes in eating his own brain. That's a bit too much information. One moment you don't have money, and the next moment you're a wanted criminal. That's a lot of information, okay? Don't tell me you didn't pass the credit rating. Have you already fallen to the point of capturing wanted criminals to earn money? Cough, how is that possible? Actually, it's like this. Luonan had a general understanding of the sequence of events from Polio's narration. Actually, even if he didn't go through Polio, just the intelligence gathering of the mental sensor network was enough to string together a basic chain of events. The framework of the events was very simple. Polio's mother, Boss June, was an important character in a vagrant power. Zhang Luan Xinz, and the others were members of this power. Zhang Luan's wife was Aunt Fun, and she was Boss June's confidant. But due to some reason or conflict of interest, Zhang Lu and the others became traitors. They took advantage of Boss Jun's absence to deal with the problem to raise the flag. Oh no, it was a covert rebellion. Zhang Lu and the others were in a dilemma due to more complicated reasons. They clearly did something, but they didn't dare to go too far. They just wanted to capture Polio and use him as a bargaining chip. This gave Polio the chance to escape, and he met Luonan on the way. Luonan felt that he had spoken very clearly, but Cat Eyes didn't gain anything other than another round of yawns. Forget it. I shouldn't have had any confidence in your ability to express yourself. No wonder President Ouyang said that if it weren't for your quick sketching skills, the brains of the pitiful people who listened to your lessons would have exploded. I didn't say it clearly. You should be involved in the conflict between the powers of the vagrants of the wilderness. You have to know that the tribes and gangs of the wilderness are as numerous as the hairs on an ox. 3 to 5 people make up a gang. 10 people make up a gang. There are also clans, companies, societies, and orders. Even a sociologist specializing in research wouldn't be able to figure out the twists and turns within. It's normal that you can't say it clearly. If you do, then it must be a misconception. However, if you can't even complete the basics of verbal expression, then it means that you lack a clear understanding of the core of this matter. In the end, you only want to intervene and help because you feel that the child called Polio is pitiful. You also feel that Brain Demon and the others are annoying. Well, you can say it like that. Then it's fine. That's right. I understand what you mean. Huh. This time it was Cat Eyes' turn to be stupefied. What did I say? Isn't it just a simple matter to be solved simply? Don't let your imagination run wild and complicate things. Don't worry, I understand. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. I definitely won't repeat the mistake I just made. Cat Eyes pressed her forehead against the bar counter. This bro was letting himself loose outside. Had he even lost his ability to understand? Luonan obtained the answer, and didn't say anything more. His consciousness shrunk into the depths of the closed system network. Cat Eyes drank too much wine. She had a toothache. She also had a bad premonition. The matter was heading in an unpredictable direction. She suddenly thought of an unverified rumor. Wait a moment. That Brain Demon is a world-renowned master hypnotist. It's said that he can control mutants. Moreover, he has close ties with some powerful organization. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived for so long. Understood. Understood your ass. Cat Eyes thought of the storm that could arise 2,000 kilometers away. She would likely be in a mess if she joined forces with it here. She just wanted to soak her head in a wine jar. Just as her entire body was powerless, she suddenly sensed something. The chair beneath her body spun around, propelling her body to face the person who just entered. Huh. Secretary are you tired of being a secretary? Are you a spy? The person who came in was Yuan. She was a lone figure, appearing noiselessly in the public activity room. Her expression was solemn. She was serious in speech and manner. She could really scare someone sick in the middle of the night. Good evening, Cat Eyes. There's no need to greet me so formally. Actually, it would have been bad if it was just a little bit closer. Speaking of which, what's the matter? Didn't you just make a call? It's about Mr. Luo. He's not even here. Is there a need to be polite? Yuan wouldn't change her habits and cultivation just because of a few words from someone else. However, since she was personally here, she didn't beat around the bush. She went straight to the point. Mr. Luo has become quite headstrong recently. You know this. Cat Eyes blinked. The boss is headstrong. Can a secretary complain? Yuan didn't resist the joking title of secretary. Instead, a faint smile appeared on her solemn face. I haven't been taking advantage of my duties recently. It's mostly because I can't keep up with Mr. Luo's tempo. Hehe. What tempo does he have? He's testing the tempo of the world. Chapter 7:15. In Xia City, it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. Some early morning trainers were already on the streets. But at the same time, it was also the time when people were the most tired. For example, Cat Eyes had soaked in alcohol and a pile of vexing matters for most of the night. She also had to deal with Vice President He, who was famous for being shrewd and capable. She felt extremely tired. When a person was tired, they lost their patience, so she didn't want to guess the deeper meaning of He Yuan's words. She only curled her lips and knocked on the table. Get to the point. He Yuan did not mind her attitude. She was no longer as serious as before. She walked to the front of the bar and sat down on the high stool next to Cat Eyes. She casually picked up a cup and played with it. How can there be an important point in the world? Actually, I came here on a whim to find someone to chat with. Cat Eyes raised her eyebrows. Oh my. The problem becomes serious the moment the leader starts chatting. He Yuan laughed again. Cat Eyes, you've been in good shape lately. Which eye of yours sees that I'm not bad? You can call it a judgment. At most, in another month or two, we can see the architect? Cat Eyes blinked her eyes. I'm not the one who wants to ascend. Yes, the growth of supernatural powers is often like natural development. It's just that it doesn't grow from a baby to an adult. Rather, it struggles out of its mother's womb and opens its eyes to see the world. Hee, I know you're talking about someone. Do you want a drink? Seeing He Yuan nod her head, Cat Eyes snapped her fingers. The robot bartender behind the counter woke up from its standby state and concocted cocktails for the two. Amidst the soft sounds of the cup, liquor, soda, and ice cubes colliding, He Yuan's voice also carried a bit of an indistinct meaning. When extraordinary power substantially rises a level, it's almost equivalent to a rebirth. Just like a newborn baby, what he sees and feels is completely different from when he was in his mother's womb. So it's normal to test and adapt. That's right, we need to verify the results. But you must also take note that the baby is only stretching out his soft fingers, while we might be stretching out our deadly blades. And Mr. Luo. The finished cocktail was placed in front of He Yuan. The light blue wine swirled in the saucer-shaped champagne glass, like the transparent seawater near the shore. However, as soon as his fingers exerted force, the wine in the cup turned into a whirlpool, violently rubbing against the walls of the cup. What Mr. Luo found out is a storm that can stir up the world. Cat Eyes let out a whistle. So what if he did? Just because he can control the storm, we have to tie up all his fingers or just chop them off. He Yuan gave a rare shrug. I just believe that there are shortcuts to experience and learning. Words. Some things might as well be said directly. Anyway, I don't really like this boss. If your conditions are right, maybe I'll agree on the spot. Sorry, I don't know. He Yuan took a sip of the light blue wine, and immediately let the rim of the cup stop at her lips. She subconsciously bit down on it. This was a very uncharacteristic action of Secretary He, but Cat Eyes found it a bit more pleasing to the eye. There is only a fine line between wanting others to do something and forcing others to do something. I don't think I can grasp the scale of this, so I hope to find more people to help me think about it. And then you found me. Cat Eyes tilted her head to look at her. He Yuan smiled and raised her cup to show her respect. Well, it's my pleasure. Cat Eyes also picked up her own cup. As an unfortunate person who has already been swept away by the storm, do you want to hear the truth from me? Please speak. Cat Eyes drained the cup of strong wine in one gulp. She borrowed the hot and spicy energy that rushed down her throat and into her brain to laugh heartily. Those unfortunate people who are about to be swept away by the storm. Welcome. To be swept away by a fellow like Luo Nan serves you right for being unlucky. Don't forget to thank me. In the end, the laughter from 2,000 kilometers away could not reach Spring City. It was impossible for the living beings here to receive the messages filled with schadenfreude. This was especially true within Zhonglu and store in the Yuhol market. The sounds of discussion in the great hall outside were clamorous. It was necessary to close the door in order to keep the inner room quiet. An unplanned flaw had appeared in the operation. Everyone felt uneasy in their hearts. Compared to the people outside, the people in the bedroom unconsciously and unconsciously stood in a more central position. They played a more important role. Within the entire store, the only person who had lost her freedom was Lady Yanfun. Right now she was lying on a bed. Her entire body was stiff, and her breathing was weak. She wore only a thin layer of clothing on her body. Many parts of the clothing were dark red and glued together. She looked weak and miserable. In front of the bed, Wright slowly and methodically put on a pair of sterile gloves. I don't like bugs. Their way of thinking is completely different from ours. However, the mutant types of insects are the most abundant in the wilderness. Many functions can be found from their bodies. For example, the one that will appear next. I call it the treasure bug. It can secrete many kinds of pheromones. It doesn't matter what effect these pheromones have within its race. We only need to be concerned about what kind of effect it will have on the state of the human body and mind. Wright put on the gloves and his 10 fingers flexed a few times. He was like a strict doctor. Next, he extended his hand and very gently supported Yanfun's cheeks, helping her straighten out her position. All pheromones are very direct things. They evoke the target's emotions and instincts of desire. I don't need to hide it. The research of pheromones in the world today is mainly focused on the aspect of sexual instincts. The results obtained from this are also the greatest. After all, they can radiate many levels of the human body and mind. The higher the level of the animal, the wider the range of radiation. The effects are also more interesting. Yanfun wasn't a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. Her mind was also very clear, and she immediately captured the key words and sensitive words in Wright's mouth. She instinctively struggled, but her body that had been injected with neurotoxin was already completely out of control. Even her head was supported, and she was unable to move. Her eye sockets subconsciously dilated, and her eyeballs swayed back and forth as she tried to find another key figure, her husband Zhang Luan. At this moment, Zhang Luan was pursing his lips and holding a cigarette butt in his hand. He stood at the farthest end of the extension cord at the end of the bed, leaning against the chest of drawers behind him. This was a position that Yanfun absolutely couldn't see at the moment, and with Wright blocking in front, he could also avoid most scenes that he didn't want to see. However, the electronic photo frame propped up on the chest of drawers was still playing a collection of photos belonging to the husband and wife. This made Zhang Luan very irritated, and he turned his elbow back to press it flat against the surface of the cabinet. Wright was a demon that could read people's minds. It was as if he was speaking to Yanfun from the tip of her heart. I want to thank your husband. Previously, out of politeness, I had deliberately avoided similar interrogation methods, but now we have coordinated and reached a consensus. Of course, I will maintain the most basic respect for a tough woman like you, Ms. Yanfun. I also ask you not to wear colored glasses to view the use of sex pheromones. It is only a key to open the door of your instinctive desires. You will experience a process from tension to relaxation. In fact, I hope that the frequency of your brain waves can rush up to 20 Hz, and then gradually fall back to 8 Hz and below. This will cause you to experience great ups and downs, but it will also allow you to freely let your thoughts fly. Through the connections of various desires and synesthesia, you will slowly dig out those things that you love the most, need the most, hate the most, and fear the most. Yanfun's body trembled uncontrollably. On the one hand, it was because of the strange tone and content of Wright's deliberately lengthened and lowered voice. On the other hand, it was because Wright had already started to undo her shirt, exposing the skin of her chest to full contact with the oppressive air in the room. The restless and almost explosive feeling of humiliation agitated her body and mind, and it also caused the sensitive area of her chest to produce an uncontrollable physiological reaction. Very good, Ms. Yanfun, you are also secreting sex pheromones. You don't need to pay attention to what this means for the treasure bug. You only need to understand that it is also very sensitive to this kind of information, and has a series of corresponding behaviors. Here it comes. Wright withdrew his right hand and quickly spread it out like a magic trick. He gradually lowered it to ensure that Yanfun could see the bug that had just crawled out of his cuff. The treasure bug in his mouth was flat, like a fat leaf, and was even better than a live bug. Its entire body was iron gray, and it covered almost half of Wright's palm. This guy is a bit big, especially after it drilled into the subcutaneous tissue. The problem is a bit more serious. But I can guarantee that when the time comes, you will definitely forget about this little thing. The pleasure and pain you will feel will be far more than what it will bring you. Yanfen lay on her back on the bed, her fully exposed chest uncontrollably rising and falling, and her fit and beautiful curves were even more thoroughly revealed. This caused Wright to temporarily jump out of the role of interrogator. He turned his head and praised Zhang Luan. "You have a good eye." Zhang Luan's entire face twitched. He lowered his head and smoked, not saying a word. Compared to the current humiliation, he was more worried about the treatment and corresponding respect that the new power would give him. However, at least from Wright's side he couldn't see anything. On the contrary, because of this interrogation, XINZ and the others downstairs would probably be at odds with him. Why was it completely different from what he had expected? On the bed, Yanfen's body suddenly trembled greatly. This was already the limit of her current physical state. The treasure bug was penetrating the skin of her chest and slowly seeping down, causing a continuous painful stimulation. Wright had described the pain as insignificant, but this was clearly not the case. Even though Yanfen's nervous system was already numb, and she could barely speak a complete sentence, she still couldn't help but moan and vaguely curse at this moment. Wright smiled as he looked at all this and explained. The treasure bug will penetrate your subcutaneous tissue and slowly move to the spine, where it will deeply fuse with your nervous system and become a special gland. Of course, I can do this from the beginning, but this process isn't meaningless. On the one hand, the treasure bug can collect and adapt to the various hormones secreted by your body during this process. On the other hand, it can also make it easier for you to enter an extreme state. Very good, you're on the right path. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.